to the Fall Book Club. My name is Maverick Evans. We're here joined by Brooke. Ren is gone, but Riley is still here. So we're going to be talking about chapters 1 through 5 on Ken Kesey's... Is that how you say his name? Kesey? Casey?
I think I was saying Kesey.
Kesey?
Kesey?
I have no idea.
We're going to be talking about Ken Kesey's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which is a really great book. We're super excited about it. And I always forget to mention this, but I'm not forgetting today. If you want to find specific points or chapters or talking points that we have throughout this conversation today, you can find them in the description below if you're watching on YouTube. So, or if you just want to come back and find those. So, much more useful having that information at the beginning
at the end.
of the video than it is at the very end. So, we're going to start off, I guess. Mm-hmm. This was a really exciting read for me. Whenever we picked it, I was glad that we pretty much unanimously decided that we should read it.
It was unanimous.
Everyone was like, we should read One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Yeah.
And I knew, especially part of the excitement for me was that we eventually, at the end of this small series for the book, will be able to compare the movie, which is starring Jack Nicholson.
And I've never seen the movie.
Me
I'm
neither.
so excited.
Jack Nicholson, and who plays Doc in Back to the Future?
Oh,
I don't know his name.
I don't know his name, but
he's,
I know
he's
who he
also
is.
a character. Who's the short dude in Always Sunny in Philadelphia? Danny DeVito.
Christopher Lloyd.
Danny DeVito.
Yeah, Christopher Lloyd, Danny DeVito.
Danny DeVito's in it. Oh my
Jack
god.
Nicholson.
I
mean,
can't
we have
take
some
Danny DeVito seriously.
real stars in here. So I was really excited for the movie, even if the book wasn't that great. And the book, in my opinion, just starting off, was awesome. What did you guys think?
I really like it.
Yeah, it was a whirlwind, but I do really like it.
You guys know that the author wrote this while he was on LSD.
That's what
like the
you
whole
say,
book,
but I just haven't read anything about that. I need
That's
to.
what my English teacher in high school, whenever we were reading this, she told us that he was like high on a bunch of stuff whenever he was writing this.
Riley posed a good question
eclectic.
before we started. She said that you said that he was on like acid or something like that when he was writing it, but did he have any experience with the like insane asylums at all?
I don't know, because that's all I heard about it was that he was just like writing it on stuff, but I don't know if he knew anything about.
Okay, I just looked up some background on our author, and as a student, Ken Kesey took part in the LSD experiment funded by the CIA. Then he wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. 2 years later, he and his friends loaded a bus full of acid traveling across America and basically sold acid across America.
Okay, well, he really likes acid, so that's fun.
Interesting.
He took part in that, and I guess that inspired him to do that. He's a huge hippie.
I feel like a lot of people were during this time.
Very big hippie. And, it was in 1975 when he published this.
Mm-hmm.
My mom's birth year.
Really?
Yeah.
Crazy.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's as old as like my fiance's parents. They're old, and she's. Or is that old? That is old, isn't it?
It's not old. It's like 40
Born in the
something.
70s.
My
40?
parents are not old.
Oh, my parents. I guess Carly's parents were born in the 60s.
Whoa.
Okay.
They're like 62 or something like that. 1962.
They're in their 50s?
She's like, yeah, her dad's like 58.
Oh. Yeah, her parents are old.
Whoa.
So they would have been reading this book in like school right after it was published or something like that.
Damn, imagine reading a book right after it's published, but I don't know what classics there are now.
I'm sure that there are books being published right now that will eventually become classics. I think they have to, like, a lot of the books have to withstand the test of time first before they get introduced into mainstream education for grade school children.
Mm-hmm.
So, the book was released in 62, and the movie was released in 75.
Oh, okay.
Which was super common for books and movies at this time. Just like Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess was written in 1962. Then Stanley Kubrick did the film of it in 1972. Usually 10 years from the time that the book was released in the 60s, a movie would have been made 10 years later.
Okay.
So So that's kind of how, like, I feel like the 60s have a ton of really good, a batch of super stellar books coming out of that decade.
Yeah.
And we also, like, have paired up movies that come with it, too.
Yeah.
So we have a hard time tracking this book. There's no official, like, chapter numbers or headings on these. So there's no titles or numbers.
So I think that our author kind of was this hippie, like, mentally ill person, because when you look at his life, not too long after he published this book, he got arrested for, like, possession of marijuana, went to jail, and he got out for faking suicide.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
How does one fake suicide?
So he could go to the insane asylum instead of jail.
Did he fake a suicide attempt?
Yep. And then he was in prison for 5 months.
Man, I've seen someone.
So he does have
fake a
experience.
suicide attempt.
So he has direct experience with the insane asylums because he was there, right,
Yeah.
for a couple months. Awesome.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
And even if he didn't, I mean, this is a super pertinent book at that time for this kind of book to be written against the institutionalized insane patients, because they're like, because as a psychology student, I totally don't agree with the deinstitutionalization of the psych wards in the 80s, just because immediately after we did that, our homeless population skyrocketed. It, like, tripled.
But then also they did mass incarcerations with mentally ill people, and you can see that in prisons now, that a lot of them are just severely mentally ill people that are in prison now, because they took away all these mental institutions instead of just making them more humane. Now all those people are
and those individuals are not receiving the psychiatric treatment that they need.
They're not at all.
Their conditions are being perpetuated by the system. They become institutionalized again, just in a different system, and in a less caring system even.
Oh yeah,
and
definitely.
It's different in different countries. They actually have, like, some pretty good quality psych wards in, like, European countries. But here, it's private pay. So, like, if I wanted to go, I mean, the only place that I would say that you can commit yourself here in our area is
like
Northwest.
The Pavilion?
Like the Pavilion. And you can stay there for, like, however long.
And
then you get outpatient.
Pretty nice.
Yeah, and and it's not bad.
And I think most pavilion stay schedules are, like, a max of, like, 4 days. And that's usually for suicidal patients. But it's still not the kind of treatment that a lot of these people need. We'll get into some of the different characters in this book and their specific, like, psychological behaviors. And some of these, you can tell that these individuals need psychiatric care, and the kind of care that they're receiving from the institution is good. The really big downside to the institution discussed in the book is really some of their more extreme treatments. Other than that, and they're, like, chronic, they just drug everybody
what
constantly.
I'm seeing more in this book is, like, they are coming in with these issues and they're not getting treated properly, or they're coming in with mild issues and they're being made worse.
Yes.
So they're giving lobotomies in this. They're getting lobotomies in this book. They're getting because that was some common practice. They're getting electroshock.
Is very of the time.
Which electroshock therapy is, like, coming back into fashion.
Is it?
Disgusting.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. Okay, so one of my friends talks about his wife and, like, how they met in the psych ward working as, like, orderlies, and because she was a psychiatrist, and so he met her in the psych ward, and then later on in their relationship, she was cheating on him, and he just tells it like this. He was like, yeah, she went and got her brain zapped, and she never cheated on me again. And I was like, what? But yeah, it's still a therapy today.
I can't believe it.
Horrible.
I mean, it doesn't surprise me, though. I would be interested to see what grounds they're attempting to...
I don't think it works at all. I don't think there's any studies showing any
benefit
to it.
I don't think it has any...
They're doing lots of different groundbreaking neurological treatment right now. We're about to, in a year or two. I was just talking to several of the doctors that practice here, and they're really excited, and so am I, for a ketamine clinic opening in Amarillo.
Yeah, to help with like depression and stuff. Yeah,
that's actually a really good idea.
Ketamine treatments are coming into big fashion right now. Their popularity is skyrocketing at the moment as plenty of journals and research studies are being published from respectable sources. The ketamine in proper dosages, the high lasts like 15 minutes to like 30 minutes, and it's very small, usually micro dosages that are administered either intravenously or otherwise, always intravenously. And the substance ketamine is antifungal, antibacterial, and antiviral.
That's so cool.
So all of the literature that's been put out right now that was supporting inflammatory diseases for depression and other different psychological problems, ketamine is the answer here because the brain is inflamed, and since it's inflamed, we administer ketamine, which is anti-inflammatory basically, and then they're good. And patients will walk in with chronic depression for the last 40 years, debilitating depression, and then we'll treat them with a proper ketamine treatment, and then they will walk out for 3 months perfect. Immediately after treatment, their depression has vanished. But this is for brain and inflammatory depression. So it's not always, if their psyche is out of sorts, this will give them a good hold on that, a good like starting point, but won't be a cure-all for those individuals. But the stuff that we're seeing now, just to compare we're seeing in the book to today, it's staggering. Oh my gosh, the treatments are so much different, and the quality of psychological medicine is
well, like in back then, whenever mental institutions were really like bad and inhuman, was whenever, or inhumane, they were the things that they would do to try and fix people's mental illnesses was like doing intense things with their psyche and their mental state, like doing electroshock therapy that can like destroy your brain. Like
it's kind
making
of crazy.
Your brain go to mush.
We see this from a male perspective in a male psychiatric ward, where like we know that like women would go in and have these issues and get sterilized. So that happens all the time. They're like they have hysteria, so they need their like uterus and ovaries removed and to cure their hysteria, which like I don't know if major surgery like would help that, but like we see all that, which is like way worse on the spectrum. Like it's just crazy, like how different everything is now, like, and how different everything is treated.
It's amazing that people let that happen though, like people, but like they were very closed off because no one really knew exactly what was happening in mental institutions. Until Geraldo Rivera did that expose on like the quality of life in like mental asylums and stuff. And it was so awful.
And I would like to see, like, that's one of the areas that I want to do more research on, is historical accounts and different official documents of like patient reviews and different like familial reviews for the patients of like the different statuses of the institutions prior to 1980. Because I figure that they can't all be bad. I mean, even if we're looking at the institution here in the book, it's really not that bad other than their treatment processes.
I don't know. The road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Right.
So like they think they're doing good, but like they're actually making it worse. So like lobotomies are taking away people's independence.
That's what I'm saying. The treatments are bad, but the statuses for this particular institution isn't that like terrible. Other than the dude nailed to the wall, we'll get there. I
don't think he's actually nailed.
No, he's not nailed to the wall. He's just tied to the wall. But but they call it nailed, as if it was like he's crucified to the wall. But that's terrible. But then again, we don't know how to deal. Like if you ended up with a patient that was a vegetable, how do you take care of this person?
And
I don't know.
I think we see that in the book, is that these people who are in charge get these God complexes. So like kind of like the Stanford prison experiment. So like, they just become like, they're like, okay, we need to do this. So they talk down to the patients a lot, and they're like, oh, you're being difficult. And instead of treating them humanely. So we don't see that today.
Yeah, if you give individuals power, then it takes only a couple days for, in Jungian terms, the shadow to take over and the most evil portions of themselves to start reigning over their subordinates. So that definitely is super relevant to Nurse Ratched. And which, by the way, the pronunciation of this character, it's spelled Ratched, but it's pronounced Ratched.
Ratched?
That's what,
from
I
the
think
movie?
it's Ratched. Yeah, the movie, everyone says Ratched. It's one of those things where I think that, like, it is a D, but it just sounds like a T when you pronounce it.
Yeah. I don't know.
I don't know.
Who knows?
I think it's Ratched. See, and you don't even know. Like, I don't even pronounce the D or the T. It's just Ratched.
We say
Ratched.
We're from Texas.
That's
Yeah, I
true.
guess so.
You say ratchet.
Ratched. And it's almost English.
Almost
Ratched.
English.
Ratched.
almost
He's ratchet.
Yeah. So okay, let's get into the book. I feel like that was a good conversation to have, though, just to surround the book with some some like historical context about the field that it was happening. And I don't know how if this was in 1962, this was a very controversial book to be out, because they had not begun to deinstitutionalize the psych wards until 20 years later.
Yeah.
So this is a big deal, this book coming out. This is like the Gulag Archipelago for the psych field. So part 1, I'll just read this off to start with our summarization. Our narrator, a large American Indian named Chief Bramdon, commonly referred to simply as Chief or Chief Broom, which he's given the nickname Chief Broom because he is given janitorial.
Yeah, he just sweeps everything.
Yeah, he just sweeps everything.
Yeah.
So our narrator, Chief Bramdon, introduces us to a grim and gray setting in a psychiatric ward. He begins by explaining the personnel that operate the ward by describing their names, appearances, and common behaviors as Chief sees it. The nurse is cruel. She has enlisted the services of cruel men, and the life of the patients seems to be a living hell. Chief describes the various types of patients, classifying them in 2 main groups, chronics and acutes. Randle McMurphy is introduced as a new character and new patient of the ward. So we'll just talk about like the introductory, like what everything looks like from Chief's perspective, just to start off, because it's harder because we don't have chapters, but it's a horror movie, like
how he's
definitely
just it's from his perspective, and it's a perspective of somebody who I'm kind of questioning if he has, like, he's really paranoid about everybody and everything. So he thinks that everybody is kind of feeding into this machine. So he has this theory that, like, they're feeding him stuff and, like, making him into a machine, or the Combine. He keeps referencing the Combine.
I mean, that's true to a point that they're,
like,
giving them so many, like, medications and stuff.
And this is
robots. Yeah, Chief has this really distorted perception of people. So, like, he doesn't trust anybody, and he's like, they think I'm deaf and dumb, and because I don't talk to anybody, but he's not. And so he's observing everybody. He knows everybody's characteristics, their mannerisms, like, and he's describing it in detail in kind of this stream of consciousness.
Yeah.
Just like that he's having this giant inner monologue with himself, and it's really interesting. I love how it's written.
Yeah.
Because it just flows, like, really well, and it's just all through his perspective of him seeing things and how he describes things. Yeah, he's super paranoid about different things. Like, I have some examples written down, but so he's really paranoid that the orderlies are, like, having sex acts with, like, the patients and stuff like that. So
I don't know. I feel like that could be
I don't
true,
know if
especially in the time.
That's what Maverick and I were saying before. We don't know, but he's saying, like, before I can catch them, and that they have special sensitive equipment that can detect his fear, that they can tell whenever he is, like, upset or nervous and stuff. So he has a lot of paranoia, and I don't know if he's schizophrenic. I'm trying to, like,
I don't know. I feel like the reason
so.
I feel like the reason he's paranoid is because he's been there the longest, and so he knows all the practices. Yeah, and he's drugged up because, you know, he'll act out sometimes, but I don't think he really has any major like mental illnesses.
No.
I think he's he was probably an acute or someone with subtle mental illnesses, and because he just wants people to leave him alone, he acts out, and so people think that he has an intense mental illness, but he doesn't, and he just wants to be able to observe with no one bothering him, with no one trying to talk to him.
But he does mention a lot, like, these machines, like, all the time, the hum of black machinery and the combine, and so he keeps, like, having this loop.
I think the hum of the black machinery are the disciplinaries.
That's what I was thinking.
I think it's just
I think he calls them the machines because they don't really have minds of their own.
Okay.
They are just doing...
Because he describes pretty thoroughly the way that
he thinks that they're robots.
That they move. I don't think he thinks that they're robots. I think it's just
more...
It's a simile.
He keeps referencing it, though. I don't know. He says...
I think it's because the hospital is a machine. They're all the pieces working together for the big nurse.
Right.
And so the... disciplinaries, they're the ones that are the machine parts, and so they're the ones that are running things for the headpiece of this machine.
Right.
He was talking about trying to foul up her equipment as much as possible by not letting her see my eyes. So like he's saying like she can tell things if she sees inside of his eyes, like she can look into him, and that I think that is
And this
paranoia.
is Nurse Ratched, right?
Yeah,
so
Nurse
Ratched
Ratched
is the head nurse of the entire facility for the most part. And she has a very strong hold on the bureaucracy, I think would be the right word, of this system, because the head board commissioner that decides who gets hired and who gets fired, but doesn't have a hand in the actual operations of the psych ward, she's best friends with since childhood, I believe, or a younger age.
Yeah, they've known each other for a really long time.
And so she has an in with this individual. So effectively, she will be reigning empress of the psych ward forever, because there's no way to remove her, since the only person who could fire her is never going to do so.
And she can decide who loses their job or who gets moved to a different area
because
by not
of her connection.
saying specifically, but she can just give an idea to them.
Yeah,
plant seeds in people's minds.
She gets to decide
that
the doctor. So like they're saying that the doctor, his name is Dr. Spivey.
Right.
He's not that intelligent, and he's easily influenced by the nurse. So, like, the nurse will just say something, like Nurse Ratched, she'll just be like, oh, they're not cooperating, are they? Or they're not doing this. And she kind of talks down to the patients a little bit. So they all kind of work in oppressing these people. Like, nobody's actually getting better. And for some reason, I think that Nurse Ratched actually thinks she's doing some good work.
Yes, I do think that she genuinely believes. So my overview of Nurse Ratched, she's Nurse Ratched, aka the big nurse, I think is what McMurphy refers to her as. She's an old, cold woman that starches her clothes to stone and holds complete dominion over the psychiatric ward. She has been working the ward since before any of the current patients arrived at the facility, including Chief Bramdon, who's been there before any of the other patients. Her manipulation is expert, and her ability to indirectly inflict pain and suffering upon her patients is even greater. Undoubtedly, the villain of this story.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so, she's the warden, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that she really does believe that what she's doing is correct.
I think so.
That there's no other way for these individuals to benefit other than her totalitarian approach.
Yeah. I actually found something really cool, like that the author did, which I don't know if he did this on purpose, but there's an example of dissociation in our book, like where, you know, the orderlies are coming to go get Chief for his shave. Yeah. And he was like, getting shaved before breakfast is the worst. And it freaks him out.
Right.
And so he's talking about how he's going into like remembering his dad and going fishing with his dad or hunting birds at the cedar trees and stuff. And so he's hiding in the closet thinking about that instead of focusing on the fear. And like that's kind of an example of dissociation. So like you're trying to get far away from your like anxiety and fear, and so he actually uses like a psychology thing and like delves into that, and I thought that was really good because people who actually are like mentally ill or have problems, everybody dissociates, just like whenever you're driving and you think about something else when you're driving, but people who have like strong mental illness like will just dissociate and detach themselves from their emotional pain and be able to like step away from it. Like if you've ever had a panic attack and you can physically see yourself, that's you dissociating. But like basically I'm really proud of our author for like putting that in there because it's just either he has firsthand like knowledge of that, or he's like actually super into psychology because he uses like actual like mental like processes that people do.
Yeah, and I thought it was a good literary tool as well, just to help us get to know who Chief is. And like mention his father. Yeah, we get to know quite a bit about Chief before the end of this 5th chapter.
Yeah.
But the descriptions that Chief provides us with, in addition to some of his like dreamlike states that he enters whenever he's enduring uncomfortable things, he describes the orderlies as machines, and I think that he considers them so because they have no empathy, no sympathy. They are mechanical things that take orders from the top, from Nurse Ratched, and even the way that they walk, he says, is motivated from, he says that if they were to stop walking suddenly or stand still for any moment, that they would fall over because they're walking with such a forward weight to them, that they're going so fast, walking slowly but walking very fast. They too have white starched suits on, orderly suits, completely white, excepting the soles of their feet, which are bright red, and their padding around when they walk is silent. They make no noise, and they're absolutely terrifying. They're so scary, and so is Nurse Ratched. She's described in a similar manner, except she's described as a massive spider that weaves expert webs that are interconnected with everything in the ward, and that the vibrations sent from one end of the web to the next, she is in complete tune with. So,
and it's like our narrator is in this big chess game, like just playing really carefully. So he has a lot of anxiety about different things, like he doesn't want to go get shaved because I'm sure it's a terrible experience getting your face shaved by somebody who doesn't really have empathy for you. And so he's talking about how like he's fine with them getting shaved until they touch his temples, and then he was like, it's like a button, like an air raid button, and everybody's yelling at me, hands over their ears from behind a glass wall, faces working around in talk circles, but no sound coming from their mouths. My sound soaks up all other sound. So, and he talks about whenever they sedate him as the fog machine, waking up from the fog and just being in these like white clouds and everything's milky. So he gets sedated and he's like, this is the worst. I miss breakfast. He was like, I hate missing breakfast.
Yeah.
So,
and that's whenever he does take his medication, but I think he dodges it a lot of the times, which is why Chief fixates a whole lot on attempting to do things every so often to seem, as he says, cagey. And cagey is just kind of a little wacky, a little spooky, you know.
Well, he just doesn't want doesn't want people coming near him, interacting with him. I think that's why he acts the way he does about like getting shaved or like any of that stuff, because he just wants people to think of him a certain way. He's a sane man,
though. This is his problem, is that he's sane completely, and so why he has to continue to remind himself. He seems like the only sane
person in there.
For the most part,
for the most part, yeah. And I think that he's probably just a victim of his environment at this point. Like, I think he might have had some kind of break. Has it been expressed why he's in there?
It will later.
Okay.
He'll say later on. I think he might allude to it at some point whenever he tells
that girl.
He tells about his time playing football and stuff.
Oh, okay.
But
and our author also played football, and like, so
that's cool.
Yeah. He put that in there. That was pretty interesting.
So So yeah, this is what happens. This is kind of the world that Chief describes, our narrator, and it is dark and scary and cold and echoey and filled with monsters everywhere. And it's a really interesting thing because the kind of imagery that's used by Ken Kesey is so unique to me because the world is average, but the descriptors that he uses manages to turn it into a horrific scene. So I really appreciate his ability to convey through Chief the spirit and the vibrations and the aura of the environment that they're in.
And he's just saying, like, we're at the end of this chapter, whenever he gets this shave and has this freak out, that they drug him, and he was like, you know, it's too awful to have really happened, but this is too awful to be the truth, but it's the truth even if it didn't happen. So he's just saying, like, he's like, I can't believe this is happening to me, but it's the truth. It's really happening currently.
I'm pouring coffee right now.
So I like that he's kind of keeping this, like, reconciling with himself and saying, like, this is really happening to me, like, I'm actually being, like, tortured basically, instead of just being told that there's being fed these lies and all these pills and all these drugs and stuff that is happening in his reality.
Yeah, Chief has somehow ended up in the institution, in the psych ward, and he has realized that stepping out of line will result in something worse than death.
Yeah, and the shock shop.
And so he takes, that's what they refer to it as, the shock shop, which is it's EST treatment, electrostatic
electroshock
therapy, electroshock therapy.
Yeah.
And the EST treatment is ruthless and not terrible in small voltages or small treatments. Yeah. You will be foggy for days, maybe a week or two, and then your cognitive abilities will return to you after about 2 weeks, assuming that you are a resilient individual and you didn't get just fried and melted.
Yeah. And
I don't actually know what happens to the brain. I'm guessing just scars. Scar tissue develops.
I have no idea. So, like, our brain already uses, like, I think it causes your brain to misfire because, like, we already have...
It's already an electrical system.
We already have an electrical system. So, like, you're introducing that and just rewiring the brain.
Yeah.
So, I don't know.
So, like, with drugs like methamphetamine, goes and interacts with the brain and then kills the synapses.
Yeah.
And these are your communication devices for your brain that transport electrons and electrostatic currents for communication, and also like pathways for chemicals and hormones, and those die. So I'm assuming that something similar happens, whether it's it just causes scar tissue, which clogs up the synapses, and
that's how I think it does. And then the higher the voltage, the more scar tissue, the more actual physical damage to your brain. But I think it does physical damage that then affects your mental well-being. Yeah. And so it can just completely fry your brain.
Yeah. And I wonder where, too, like, the electrical pathway was. Like, where does the current tend to go through? Like, is it just random and bounces around, or does it form?
They put it on your temples.
A track?
Yeah, they put it right here.
They put it on your temples, and then they put something in your mouth because it makes your jaw clench down. It'll break your teeth.
So you don't break your teeth or bite your tongue off. Yeah. God, it's a ruthless. It's a barbaric treatment.
I can't believe that anyone thought that
the Mayo Clinic still lists it as a treatment.
Disgusting.
So it's done under general anesthesia, in which small electric currents pass through the brain, triggering a brief seizure. They call it ECT now.
ECT?
Electroconvulsive therapy.
Okay.
It can quickly reverse symptoms of certain mental conditions.
Right, because it screws you up.
Yeah.
Side effects. It makes your brain a little different and a little worse.
So side effects could be headache or muscle ache in the hours following treatment, confusion shortly after treatment, nausea, short-term or long-term memory loss, irregular heart rate. Yeah, and it's still used today.
Yeah, so you correct the behavior at the expense of getting rid of all their memory and their thoughts, and they can't come up with any coherent thoughts or actions or anything.
Yeah, it's still used today. ECT can be fatal, but deaths are extremely rare, 1 in about 10,000 people.
That's
I don't like
too
those
many.
Well, and see, this is like the different, and this is my opinion because I'm anti-pharma. I'm anti-pharmaceutical all the way through because we have too many people right now that, starting in the 1970s, whenever we started subsidizing pharmaceutical medicines through the U.S. government and providing them to our troops, suicide has increased exponentially in U.S. troops since that time. This is why we have black box warnings on the back of our pharmaceutical drugs that say this may cause suicidal thoughts and homicidal tendencies. Who the hell takes a drug that has those
Why would you take
warnings on the
something
back?
that says homicidal tendencies
That's
or like
scary.
suicidal urges?
Okay, ECT is approved by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and has been shown to be highly effective, giving some patients full reversal of severe depression symptoms.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Like, people are still using it.
What they do, it's the same concept for the EST or ECT, if you want to use the current term or acronym.
ECT is, okay, myths busted. Is it like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest?
Is it?
Yeah, okay, so it's a myth, like, it's an organization for the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center. And so they said that ECT is like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. ECT today is a sophisticated procedure, nothing like how it's portrayed in that old movie. Today, ECT is performed under general anesthesia. Patients are monitored continuously to reduce the risk of complications, and patients are asleep and unaware of the stimulation.
Oh, so what? So now we just have less convulsing, and they're just
yeah.
not
So
aware
you're
of
still
it?
giving them
it doesn't matter.
seizures, but now they're not aware of it. It's fine.
The idea behind these treatments, whether it's amygdala drugs, which are hormone inhibitors, so we prevent you from feeling emotion.
They use it at Johns Hopkins.
If it's the EST or ECT treatments, is that we just destroy the amygdala. And then if it's destroyed, then you can't feel any of the negative emotion, so you're good. But that's not true, because now you're just a zombie. So, good.
Well, that's the problem with getting rid of certain emotions through things like that are super hardcore. And, like, I mean, yeah, sure, you got rid of their clinical depression, but maybe now they never feel sadness anymore.
Right.
Okay, so I guess, like, the purpose of it, so, like, what they're trying to say and, like, the benefits of it is that it causes such an intense seizure because your brain's already rewired. It's already wired to have these, like, depressive, like, neural pathways. So it's already wired. You already have these really strong connections for these depressive behaviors. And so when you get it zapped in these specific spots, I guess it's more sophisticated now, it breaks down that neural pathway. So,
but what if it breaks it down completely and then you end up not even being able to feel that emotion anymore?
I don't know. This is what the medical community is saying, and it's kind of freaky that it's out at all, because maybe we do have, like, a really bad, like, view of it. And maybe it's actually beneficial because it's not drugs.
I would have to read more about it.
It's a procedure, but I mean,
just sounds like a medieval procedure.
No, it's not. I mean,
I'd have to read more about it.
I'm not super educated enough to make any definitive claims against ECT treatment at the moment.
Yeah.
But
I can't believe it's approved by the FDA.
From the journals that I've been reading about brain inflammation and different ketamine treatments, that seems like the way to go for neurological treatment. Psych treatment is best for clinical therapy and talk therapy.
Yeah.
And between those two treatments, I don't believe there's anything you can't fix. Between, like, good, like, diet and ketamine treatments for neurological issues, you can fix most things, and then talk therapy and clinical therapy.
I think a lot of clinical therapy is really good right now. A lot of the processes are really good, but yeah, some of those treatments seem
like that seems extreme. But I think, like, if you were in an extreme situation, you're willing to try anything.
Well, yeah,
that's
and I mean,
scary though.
Obviously, there's exceptions to everything and exceptions to exceptions, because if you're an individual who is attempting to commit suicide, then you obviously need to take some form of amygdala drug. You need to take an antidepressant immediately, because it's better to not be dead and drugged than to be dead and not drugged.
As a person who has taken antidepressants, I wouldn't recommend them over therapy and counseling, and going outside and drinking water and doing like healthy behaviors.
Getting your vitamin D levels up is imperative.
Sometimes people need to take
and sometimes
those medication
because, and I agree, like I needed to at the time, but I will say they drastically changed my personality. It's like being watered down.
Well, yeah, the people I know that take hardcore psychiatric drugs, they're slower in thought processes. And
it really affects your brain chemistry. Yeah. So, and I had to get off of my Cymbalta because I was taking Cymbalta because I have fibromyalgia on top of, which is another neurological just disorder. If you have chronic pain, it's just a cascade of stuff. So they gave me that to help with it and also my depression. And it basically, so like if I missed it by an hour, I would get brain zaps. So like it's like you turn your head and your nervous system, because it affects it suppresses your nervous system. And so yeah, it was an SNRI. There are norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors, and then there's a serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So I had an SNRI, and it was so bad. Like I could turn my head and I feel like electricity going through my body.
Oh my God.
And like then whenever I had to get off of it, and I got off of it by myself, and I wouldn't recommend that for anybody, getting off your medication without being advised underneath a doctor.
Why'd you do
because I literally felt myself being different, and I couldn't take it. I would rather be upset or depressed than be on a medication that altered me like that. It was really upsetting. Like I knew that I needed it at a time to get me out of a dark place, coupled with my counseling, but it was the way that he describes things being cloudy and murky and gray is just like whenever you're on those kind of like suppressing drugs, because you're just so spaced out. And it was my freshman year of college, and it was just a really hard time for me to like get out of that. And so I got off of it, but when I was getting off of it, I've had like the most manic and extreme thoughts like I've ever had in my life. It was scary. It was scary. So I definitely, it's almost like having mental illness or like having something wrong with you, and reading these books and like reading this book and like seeing like how people process stuff and think. It's really relatable, and like how talking about how they don't want to take their medication because it makes them sharper. Like I can completely understand that.
Yeah, because it just dampens the problem. Like you just this is why I follow a lot of functional medicine or alternative medicine, however you want to call it. And the principles behind that is that we want to find the root cause of the illness and the cause of the symptoms, rather than treating it pharmaceutically or otherwise, just to put, the proverbial sticker on the gas light. Is that if your gas light is on or your oil light is on, it's because you're low on oil or gas. And if you just put the sticker on it, then you're not fixing the cause of the issue. You're just muting the symptoms.
And I found that a lot. So like if you do go to psychiatrists and stuff like that, they do a lot of blanket stuff. So you're like, I have anxiety, and they're like, okay, well, when do you have anxiety? And especially here, because anxiety medications are so addictive and people abuse them. So especially in our area, people sell their Xanax and stuff. So people who actually need that, because they just have generalized anxiety, cannot get it. And so they'll put them on an antidepressant to control their anxiety, and they don't need that necessarily. So
which anxiety specifically, from most of the stuff I've read, is usually a psychological issue. Usually not a chemical imbalance or some kind of neurological issue. It's usually a psych problem.
And
so therapy could help you with that, definitely.
You can be like more genetically prone to just having anxiety and stuff like
that.
Yeah,
and I think it can be lessened by more psychological help and stuff like that, rather than being doled down with medication. But I think with some like actually like chronic mental illnesses, or like deep-seated psychological trauma that causes a mental illness, it's a lot harder to dull that down And a lot of times you do need to just
take a bunch of medications and dull your entire personality, but that's the only way you can operate. Like the guy that was in A Beautiful Mind, what's his name? John Nash. Have you seen that movie with Russell Crowe?
I haven't.
It's about really a man, a mathematician with paranoid schizophrenia that's an actual guy, and he had to take all these medications, and he felt like he couldn't come up with mathematical theories, and he didn't feel like he could critically think as much anymore because he was just so doped up. And so he stopped taking his medication, and he almost killed his and his wife's child because he left him in a bathtub alone. He was like, oh, my friend's watching him. But obviously there was no one watching him. Yeah. And he ended up actually dying because he stopped taking his medication again. He got in a car accident.
And for abnormal psychological issues, I think that the pharmaceutical conversation is more malleable.
Yeah.
I would think. But only for, there's so few actual abnormal psychological issues that occur with individuals like that. Like genuine schizophrenia is not as prevalent as like generic depression.
Yeah.
So, and also circumstantial depression as well. Like if something terrible happens to you, like,
or like trauma.
Expect to be depressed. Like if your loved one or your partner dies tragically or otherwise, really expect to be depressed for a little while, because that's circumstantial and it's proper for you to feel that way. You should not in that case go toward an antidepressant unless of course we're trying to do some crisis treatment to prevent suicide. So anyway, this is a lot of the great conversations that we can have. This is why this book is so important, because these were the conversations that were being spurred by it at that time. And a lot of people didn't really even know how terrible these psych wards were. And if they did, they didn't care because they were using them to their advantage to put individuals in there that they didn't want to have to deal with, which I feel like is not as prevalent as the media tries to say, but it was something that happened and it should never have happened. So we have this world that's described to us by Chief. It's scary. There's all kinds of stuff. There are two groups, the chronics and the acutes. Chief is a chronic because he was there for so long, although he's sane. And then we have a new character come in, and this guy is awesome. I freaking love this guy.
He's cool at first.
Apparently he's a psychopath.
He's also he's raped a kid. So
right.
And then he was like, they consented.
He's very jubilant. So in comparison to the other characters that we have, he's a breath of fresh air. But as an individual, his past is not good.
He's not a good person.
And listen, it was statutory rape. It wasn't. So
let's preface this.
Yes. I mean, he says that in the book too. He was like, listen, Doc, it was statutory rape. The way
though that he defends it.
He said no. He said she was 17.
I feel like that was really prevalent, but at the same time, he's still a grown man. And I don't think that he belongs in a psych ward. I think he's just a criminal.
Well, they put him in the psych ward, I think, because he's showing psychopathic tendencies.
So they're saying he's psychopathic.
So
I think he's just.
This is what happened.
He's a little bit of a narcissist.
Randle McMurphy.
Yeah, definitely.
I think so, but not to the degree that like Nurse Ratched is, though.
That's true.
So in comparison,
but she might just be a sociopath. He could be a psychopath.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'll have to break out my DSM-4 for that one, but
well, sociopaths are usually they can operate better in social settings.
She's just on a power trip.
Yeah, but the main quality of being a psychopath is usually you have to have committed a crime or done something illegal at a pretty young age. Usually they have conduct disorder,
right?
And so the line is blurred between like good and bad. Sociopaths know what the lines are, even if they don't abide by them, but they know what it is,
right?
And they can think about it. But a psychopath is like, I can do whatever I want.
Usually psychopaths don't make it high up into any kind of hierarchy because they display before the age of, so for children who display antisocial tendencies before the age of 4, as of right now, there is no intervention. There's no clinical intervention known for those individuals because they're just set. We don't know how to fix those
kids. And even with conduct disorder, they took it off as a personality disorder because it changes.
I have a really good documentary for you guys to watch. It's called Child of Rage.
Ooh.
It's about a child who was like really abused at a young age, and she developed psychopathic tendencies. So like she would stick her brother with needles, and her parents had to lock their door because she always was trying to hide knives. She was incredibly aggressive. She showed like really inappropriate like sexual behavior because she was sexually abused at the age of like 1. So like she was just very unloved at a very young age, and it caused her to have all these psychopathic tendencies. And so they put her in this like extreme therapy, like where they sent her to like this ranch, and they had animal therapy, and they basically gave her so much structure in her day, and like she was able to talk out her emotions and her feelings. So like they woke up every single day at the same time, and they were like, this is your bed, this is your cup. This was at what age? 8. She went in at 8. And so she was very aggressive and had a lot of things going on, and they gave her just this really intensive therapy where like she just had so much like structure and responsibility every day, worked with the animals, talked about her issues, was able to like deal with it, because she would talk about her sexual abuse and all her trauma just very like plainly, and things that she would do to her brother. And so at the end of the documentary, after this therapy that she had, they were like, well, how do you feel about hurting your little brother like that? And she wept. And it's the first time you actually see an actual human emotion in this child. But for like older adults and stuff like that, I don't think that there's a treatment for
there's
like
really not, but I mean,
because your age, like your like tendencies and your pathways, they start to solidify. So like right about 8, we have these, and I've learned this in child psychology too. So like our brains prune. We have so many babies have so many neural pathways, like a ton, and we start doing a process called pruning and just building stronger connections, and those diminish. And so whenever they're younger, like if you can intervene at a very young age and give them like quality and good therapy, then they're able to overcome that. And that woman,
I think psychopathy is a mental disorder. I don't know if you can necessarily get rid of it if they have true psychopathy or
she actually did.
Sociopathy.
Behaviors and tendencies displayed before the age of 4 are concrete most always. Also, learned conduct and behavior before the age of 4 is mostly concrete after that point. So if you want your children to behave and listen to you, then you have until 4 to do those things.
Yeah, there's certain
and
the child's personality though isn't concrete until about 9.
Yeah, and I think that they intervened at just the right time, because this woman now is an advocate for child like sex abuse victims, and she's actually functioning in society today. Like she still has all this trauma from not being taken care of like as a baby and a child, and just going through all this bad stuff. But she's actually a functioning adult today because of this therapy, which was actually in the 80s.
There's definitely a documentary that explores what kind of terrible nurture problems can be caused.
Yeah, that begs the question, like, do you think people are born like that?
Yeah, like I said, if they display antisocial tendencies inside 1 to 4, they're stuck there. We don't know how to fix those people.
I don't know if I necessarily think they're born with it. I think there's certain predispositions to certain personality traits and certain things like that. But I think, some mental illnesses are genetic, like schizophrenia can be genetic. Bipolar disorder can also be, some things are trauma based. But I think sometimes people have predispositions towards certain personality types, like towards narcissistic personality disorder or conduct disorder. It's also a product of environment sometimes, extraneous circumstances, mental cues in life and stuff like that.
And it's not, I wish it wasn't the case, but that's what the literature says, is that if you are experiencing antisocial behaviors before or during the age of 4, we're kind of stuck there. We don't know how to help. We do a lot of interventions to help those children, and they don't work for some reason. And part of that reason as well is that they get put into a situation with the world. So say if they go to school or wherever, the individuals that they interact with when they go into the world,
a huge part
we form a positive feedback loop. So children who exhibit desirable behaviors they get a positive feedback loop.
Yeah.
Feedback loop of rewards.
Yeah.
So they get invited back to houses to spend the night. The parents always rain praise on them for being so well behaved, very polite at the dinner table, all of these other things, and so they continue to develop better and better behaviors, and the world adopts them and takes care of them. But then the children who just innately are born with tendencies toward antisocial behaviors, they form a positive feedback loop of negative reinforcement, or not negative reinforcement, but punishments. They get neglected by the world. They don't want them to play with their kids.
I think we definitely have a society built towards if you have a normal psyche, if you're born with no mental illnesses, the world is created for you. If you have a mental illness, then you're shunned from society, and a lot of times...
And it's difficult to identify antisocial behavior as a psychological problem. It just looks to everyone as bratty behavior, or
exactly. Or but it's also characterized as a personality disorder.
Autism.
Yeah.
So people have a serious problem with autism and want to cure autism. So you walk around and you see those cure autism signs, which crawl all over me. You cannot cure autism. Autism is just it is wrong. It's immoral. No.
Well, didn't you know that vaccines cause autism?
Listen.
Yeah.
A
There's
very
nothing wrong with
unpopular opinion, but we know in large part what causes autism, which is brain inflammation. And I've seen and read multiple...
I want to see the information based on that, because autism, people are just born that way. It's genetic. I actually know families who literally just have children with autism back to back to back, because that's their family.
What? You're telling me it's not vaccines
causing It's not vaccines.
Listen,
it's not vaccines.
I'll stay away from the vaccine conversation, but we know that, first of all, that autism is spiked massively in the last 20 to 30 years. I think it's just been
diagnosed. It's just been diagnosed. I think people have had it for
not just diagnosis, but even if you look at mental retardation diagnosis, their symptoms are not the same as
No, it's a pragmatic disorder, actually.
I think a lot of them were...
Let me use my degree real quick, actually. Okay, guys. So I work with a lot of children.
General education degree.
Actually, I have a bachelor's in science in interdisciplinary studies, which means that I know how to teach children. I'm actually worked with early childhood for a long time, and that's really my forte. And especially my kids that I work with, they're 3 and 4, so we start seeing issues like that early on. So with pragmatic disorders, it's just social interaction. They're having they don't know when to laugh, they don't know when to and you can see it a lot in babies. So they'll start stimming and doing different things. And those are really early on signs. But it's not necessarily aberrant behavior, because if you just learn how to accommodate for these people, they can function perfectly well in society. I have a friend, we'll call her Sandra. I met in college, and as soon as I met her, I knew that she had autism, because you can make a joke and she'll look at you and she'll laugh a beat just a second later, or doesn't understand when to cut in the conversation.
Yeah, she has to mirror.
Yeah, so she doesn't understand that. But the best way that I was ever described autism is from actually Hey Arthur. And it said, imagine you're on an alien planet and all their jokes are just weird. Their mannerisms are weird. The way they dress is weird. The way they look at you is weird. And you just cannot process that.
You can't pick up social cues.
Yeah, you can't pick up social cues. But it's not necessarily something you can work with. That you can be completely disabled by. It's not a disability. It's just how you perceive the world. And I think people have probably always had this, but it hasn't been diagnosed.
I bet it was misdiagnosed a lot of times as an antisocial personality or something like that.
Because of cold mothers. So back in the day, if you had a cold and unloving mother, this would cause autism, which isn't true. You're just literally born that way. We think a lot of people who were actually the world's geniuses and stuff like that had autism. We look back on...
all geniuses nowadays, especially Elon Musk, he does not know how to act like a normal person at all. He's so awkward in interviews. Right. He's really quiet. He doesn't know how to talk.
So here's the deal. We developed the autism spectrum, right? And we took Asperger's off of the table. That's not a diagnosis anymore. We don't diagnose people with Asperger's anymore. They're just now
on the
spectrum of autism. And so we've even spread the autism spectrum out so far that they've attempted to eliminate things like ADD. So now ADD is not a diagnosis treatment either. Now it's just they've morphed ADD and ADHD together, and they're both ADHD, and they're at the bottom end of the autism spectrum. So this is, to me, I feel like we have a hard time defining like what autism is, because there's so many. Like, you could be
there's a bunch of different forms of it.
In addition, I'm not
convinced it manifests differently,
that every child is born with autism. I think that they develop it extremely early on in their
within
like
childhood. 3 to 4 months.
Maybe some of them. I think there could be some outliers that it does develop during early childhood, but I think it can also be a genetic or carried trait or something like that.
I've seen it in multiple families where like the older brother or like they have autism. Actually, there's a family that I'm kind of working with right now, and 2 of the older brothers both have autism, and I have the little girl in my room, and they're like, well, it's only passed on through the boys. That's what they kept saying, is that the boys. And I'm like watching her, and I'm like, and one of the teachers was saying like, well, do you think that she's mirroring the behaviors of her brother? And I was like, no, children don't stem like most normal children. Like, if you start working with a bunch of kids, you can tell which kids have just different behaviors.
Well, it's likely that it could pass through a specific sex, because there are specific chromosome defects that we can have that are only carried on through females, because the extra or lacking chromosome kills the infant in the womb if it's a male. So it's possible that they could travel through sexes, but so I don't know. That's the whole conversation, is that they have a lot of stuff saying that autism can be caused or linked to brain inflammation early on in their childhood and infancy. And so if that's the case, I see no reason why we couldn't treat it early on and prevent it. And I would like to like ask somebody, like I have like an autistic family member. I have plenty of autistic friends. And I feel like they're very one-dimensional. So they're very good at specific things. But I would like to challenge anybody to say that they wouldn't want to be a more well-rounded individual. Like, if you could try and help somebody out socially to where they could just be a more normal person, especially ones who are at the higher end of the spectrum.
Yeah. But this is like talking about like neural like normalcy. So like saying like that we're neurally and like socially well-rounded, but like
you don't want your child to be part of the 15% of the U.S. population who can't keep a job at McDonald's, right? You don't.
Yeah, you don't want that. That's true. But if we had a better society and we could care for like different individuals and varying needs, because everybody's different and like works differently. I feel like you're doing your child a disservice if you don't want them to be able to take care of themselves. If you have that option. There can be therapies for people with autism to help them better integrate into the world and into society. But the fact that like it bothers me deeply to say people like, hey, let's cure autism, because that's saying like, let's change your entire personality. Let's change who you are, because autism is so integrated into who that person is. Right. Like, yes, you would love your child to look you in the eye. You would love your child to want to like hold you and be more attached to you in like a regular, like normal way. But it's toxic to, say that like we can cure something that is basically like that's who that child is at that point. So like we can't cure that, and you can't take that back. But the opposite is true for individuals who are disabled in other ways. They are continually, and this is the attitude that we carry towards individuals who have lost limbs and as a result are disabled from walking, and they are continually projecting out the idea and concept that they will not allow their disability to define them. That this is not a part of their characteristic, and that they continue on with life as if it had never happened. They continue to compete in like BMX races and all kinds of stuff. So I don't see how that is an argument that it would be part of their characteristics. Yeah, but it's not as much of a disability as much as it's just like a behavior. But it is a disability in so much as it prevents them from doing something. It disables them, right? I think in some circumstances. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a status. Yeah. I think with some of them, it's not... like the ones that are higher functioning, that can, that's just part of their personality. That's just who they are. Yeah, and they wouldn't want to change that, like, no matter what. So, like, we know... especially if it makes them better at certain things. Who had autism, and he was extremely exuberant and, like, a really fun person to be around. Y'all know who I'm talking about?
Yes. But
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
he was
yeah.
very fun. And, like, he was like, I have Asperger's. And his twin brother also has Asperger's and is non-functioning. But then we have another one who is in college and doing, like, very well, like, with, like, different things.
Mm-hmm.
So...
I don't know. I try and keep a very progressive
But, like,
mind
would we
about
cure
it.
him? Like, that would change his personality.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
that would change who he is.
I don't think so. I think it would allow his personality to flourish. I think it would allow his personality to come forth more. And I'd like to keep a progressive mind on these subjects because we want science and medicine to progress, right? If we can help people out, we want that option. We don't want to keep ourselves where we are. That's very conservative, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
I guess it would just depend on the person, and if they wanted to be different or not have that define who they are, and they're fine with it being a part of their personality versus someone that doesn't want it to be.
I have a hard time with it because it leads into like being like a eugenic society, and like everybody's different, everybody's brain functions differently, and
we're
even
there.
if people are disabled,
we're already there. In Canada, China especially, we're already there. UK, they already do abortions according to like what gender you want. Like if it's autistic, they kill it.
That's extremely inappropriate. Like
right.
we shouldn't live in a world like
Legitimately,
that.
they can tell you.
Shouldn't have eugenics at all.
They told my mom about that too because I was supposed to be autistic.
Or Down syndrome?
No, well, whatever it was, but they were like, yeah, we have a really high case of like your child being mentally retarded. Do you want to go forth with it? And she was like, well, yes. Like I don't have what else am I going to do about it?
Yeah.
Abort it. So, and they do that very, very regularly, especially in China. They just do it on the basis
well,
of sex.
in China, it's because
they have a
they can only
limit, yeah.
well, they can have 2 children now.
2 now.
Wow. But
I'm
they've moved to 2 children. Mm-hmm. But I mean, if you have a 3rd kid, you have to get it aborted anyway. So
they have children in trash cans there. There's a really famous photographer who goes around the cities and started taking pictures of the dumpsters there, and just on the top, just children, mostly women, mostly little girls, just in the trash cans and stuff. So
well, they'll want little
we're already
boys
there,
too.
and I would like to move away from there and instead help these individuals who are going to be born with disadvantages or will develop them early in infancy.
Creating a better society for them that's better able to support like our varying degrees of mental function. Like everybody has different things, and people are going to be born with different abilities, like in different things. So if we create a better society for them instead of like, okay, let's fix the problem. Like every once in a while, there's things that can be genetically preventable, and I understand that. And
I mean, we practice eugenics with preventing people from incestually procreating. You have an issue with that eugenic?
No.
Right, you don't. You pick and choose what eugenic practice you want and which one you don't want. So I think that it's best if we can take a look at the likelihoods of these disabilities being born into the children or developing early in infancy, that we can take medicinal, proactive precautions, whether it be a dietary or not. Increasing fat diets in the children proves high-fat diets, just even from breastfeeding, improves the child's IQ by 15 points. That's huge. That's massive. 15 points.
Does it?
Yes. High-fat diets. What is the brain made of? Nothing but fat. These are studies that came out of UCLA and Berkeley already years ago, but no one cares about them. They still feed off of the bottle. I got fed off the bottle. You know how much smarter I would be if I had been breastfed? That's probably why you're so smart.
Oh, I think it's.
See?
I think. Well, I don't know. Like we have people in, like poor countries that are predominantly breastfed, but they just don't have the opportunities and advantages that we have.
I think opportunities and advantages definitely feed into how intelligent someone can be.
Yeah.
Because I mean, if you don't have any opportunities for anything, you're going to seem less intelligent, even if you actually are more intelligent than people.
Yeah.
There could be a kid in Africa that has no formal education that's way smarter than us, but they don't have the ability to acquire knowledge or anything.
Or, they don't have the opportunity.
And this is true. So, the opportunity of the culture, I believe,
think it does give you a leg up.
Like when the Jews came over to America just before World War I, when they enlisted for that war, their testing scores were terrible. They were all basically dumb. Like they performed less than almost every other race in the U.S. military. And then after World War II, they had established themselves in garment making and all kinds of other economies in Hollywood and banking, and their IQ shot up within the matter of like 30 years.
Opportunity.
Right.
Yeah.
But it was their affluence, though, and it was their work ethic that allowed them to rise up. And this is the same with West Indians that come over. This is the same with Asians, who are the most affluent individuals in America.
It's actually super interesting right now. So this is something I'm being taught, like that I was taught, is that children have an extremely hard time learning when their brain is going through trauma. And trauma can be their parents getting divorced. It can be their dog dying. It can be like just any kind of like conflict going on. They can't learn because they have all this going on. So like in like second grade I had to like be rehomed, like and I was living with my grandma, and I remember like basically like learning nothing all of second grade, like and not being able to like function properly. So that has something to do with like people's like brain chemistry and stuff like
children
that.
really need stability and schedules. They need a routine. They benefit very well from that. So if it's disrupted and their life is very chaos ridden, then they'll suffer.
Really, really interesting, like what we can think about, like delving into just the kind of background that we're seeing with our characters. And he really does mention a lot of
well, we're exploring some of the ideas what some of these patients may or may not have suffered early in childhood, whether it was nature or nurture, and how they ended up here. And we can look at several different characters here that relate to the things that we're discussing, and kind of like armchair diagnosis, which don't do that with anybody but like characters from books.
Characters from movies, books, TV shows. That's okay, but not your friends or your
family or even famous people.
Don't self-diagnose.
Don't do that. But so where are we now? We got about
after he had the freak out with the shave.
We were on about where McMurphy right comes in.
So McMurphy comes in, and he is gregarious. He doesn't have a very good past, but we'll get into that in a second. He kind of walks in. Let's see. Do I have McMurphy's introduced as a new character and a new patient of the ward. He walks around both sides of the ward, shaking the hands and meeting every patient regardless of their status, conscious or not, claiming that he wants to find the head crazy person and challenge them because he was the best man in every other position he ever took, so he might as well be the best crazy person as well. Eventually, he has a kind of therapy session with Doc Spivey. My
like
autocorrect says Doc Spicy. With
Dr. Spivey.
Doc Spivey and Dr. Spivey and Nurse Ratched.
And they describe how he looks too. He has like a seam, like a scar.
He has a huge seam that goes across his face, and it's fresh too. So it still has the stitches in it.
And he's got curly red hair, and he wears a hat.
Wasn't he just in jail?
Like dinner plates. So he has very big hands.
And his skin's all rough from working in the sun. He's dark.
He's darker, and he wears a motorcycle cap, which is just like a black cap that is like you would put on under your motorcycle hat to, keep your hair down, or
it doesn't have like a bill or anything, right?
I don't think so.
It just can spin it around in his hand. I'm trying to envision it.
I'm thinking of like a yarmulke, but bigger.
It's
just a cap.
Yeah, it's just
like a brimless cap.
Yeah,
it's like a hat, but it just goes right on his head that he can put his helmet over.
Yeah, I'm thinking like kind of like a
And he has a leather jacket on.
Hat, but like a beanie. I'm just thinking of
beanie. It's like a beanie but a hat.
Yeah.
But like a ball cap material. So, and then he has a leather jacket on and leather motorcycle boots and everything.
Are they allowed to wear their own clothes?
He gets to wear it for a while.
Like that, because he was like, I just got out of the jail.
Yeah. So they've escorted him into here and just allowed him to walk through the common area as they do the paperwork to try and commit him.
Life was so different in this time that someone just getting out of jail, going to a mental institution, doesn't have cuffs on or anything, has his normal clothes on.
And he wasn't in like prison. He was at a work camp.
He's at a work camp, and then they took him to the jail, and he was like, I've already had enough baths. So as soon as they walk in, they're like, we got to get you in for your bath. And he was like, hold on.
They always like lube up the like syringes and stuff and like whatever they're using.
Thermometers to put
the
in his
thermometer,
blood.
and they like got the Vaseline and really lubed it
up. And
up.
they were walking around, and he was like, "Hold on, guys." Basically, the orderly's following him around with this lubed up thermometer, and he's just like, "1 second, I have to go introduce myself." And he's shaking hands with like everybody in the psych ward, meeting everybody, and he's being really friendly. So we have the man, I can't remember his name, that was nailed to the wall or tied up against the wall.
He's a vegetable.
Yeah, and he was like, "I don't know about you, but like a man shouldn't be standing in his own water," and like steps him aside because he's standing in his own pee, and like everybody's just zombified.
I bet
he's
the only so bad in there.
He's the only normal person there.
So this is an interesting thing. One of the most notable events that happens while he's going around shaking everybody's hand is one, he's very kind and very well-meaning, it seems, to all of the individuals, whether they're chronics or acutes. So the acutes all are more verbal and expressive. They're more cognitively capable, and the chronics, most of them, are mute or dysfunctional cognitively to the point where you can't communicate with them.
Divided between the walkers and the vegetables,
yes,
right?
So there are walker chronics and there are vegetable chronics, and he does not discriminate between any of them. He goes up to them and shakes their hand, whether they're conscious or not, and talks to them and says a few words, introducing himself as McMurphy. And it's at this point that he locks eyes with Chief. And whenever he does, this is a really cool thing that happens, is that he sees Chief, and immediately McMurphy's expression changes a little bit. And he gets a big smile on his face. And the book describes McMurphy as having this big smile, which is very fitting for Jack Nicholson to be portraying him in the film, because he too has a very big smile. Yeah. And he cracks a big smile and gives him a wink, because he immediately sees him. And somehow McMurphy identifies.
It's like he knows.
He knows immediately.
But that's what
upon
Chief
first
says
seeing
too.
him,
He's like, he found me out.
Yeah.
He knows.
Yeah, he knows that I'm not deaf and dumb.
And
everybody's like, he's deaf and dumb.
And whenever
like,
he goes up to Chief to like shake his hand and stuff, and Chief is like staring ahead, trying to be like, "Oh, don't notice that I'm conscious."
He forces Chief to shake his hand and stuff. And I think he notes too. This is when we get to see how big his hands are, how big McMurphy's hands are like dinner plates, because Chief is very tall. He's like 6.
Oh, they said
he's like 6'7".
He's 6'7", so he's a very large individual, but McMurphy's hands are comparable to his.
Yeah.
So for both very large individuals, McMurphy's just a bit wider and much shorter, obviously, but his hands fit in perfectly with Chief's, and this is when he gets the big smile and wink, and he says, "Oh, I see what you're doing here. I see."
Yeah, like he sees through it.
He says, "I'll be quiet."
And this is the thing about him, like, pushing past. So he's trying to point out to all these people, he's like, "Hey, like, these are what these people are doing to you." Which leads into, like, the later conversation between him and, what's that man's name that's, like, in charge?
Man, I don't
He's
remember
not in
what
charge.
his name is.
He's
like
guy?
the smart guy,
The smart guy.
Oh, Mr. Harding.
Oh, yeah,
Yes.
Harding, who has been, I'm pretty sure he the one that was like, "I just want to know what's in these pills," and they took him and got him lobotomized?
No.
Who's the one? Okay, there was one guy that was like, "I just want to know what's in these pills."
That's McMurphy.
That's McMurphy?
Yeah.
McMurphy doesn't get lobotomized from that, though.
Yeah, he doesn't.
No.
When they were there,
They, like,
came back
for-
with
So
fruit
this is
and
when he
things.
first gets there. So shortly after he does the meet and greet with everybody, they call a line for prescriptions.
Yeah.
And so he lines up and gets in the line. I think he cuts everybody, actually. And they try and give him some pills. And this is whenever he questions, like, what's in the pills. And he says, "Well, I just don't really like taking pills that I don't know what's in."
Yeah, like,
So-
he's like, "I just want to know the name. Like, what is it do and what's it called?" And they were like, "Obviously, he's not being cooperative."
Yeah,
and they, like,
so-
called the nurse over and took him away.
I think he ends up taking the pills, and then he puts them in his mouth, and then goes to talk to Mr. Harding, and then while they're at the table talking, he like reveals that he didn't in fact swallow them. He just played like he did.
And then they talk about what they would do about the big nurse.
Yeah, and the wolf and the rabbit conversation.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. They start having this group chat. Oh my gosh, guys. So there's one part where he was saying, like, I mean, it's McMurphy talking about him being a psychopath, and he's like, "Maybe it's because I, like, have too much sex." and have too much fun. But he goes, but I mean, whoever heard tell of a man getting too much poozle?
I saw that and I thought it was the funniest thing ever to call it poozle.
See, and that's why I thought that McMurphy is just such a funny character.
Yeah, he's a funny character.
First of all, he has zingers back to back to back. Like reading this book, I was laughing out loud.
Yeah,
the whole time. Just McMurphy's just making me laugh the whole time.
Where they're following him around and he's talking to the orderly and he's like, "God damn, Sam, can't you wait half a minute to prod me with that damn thermometer of yours?"
Yes, it's just so funny. He has such really good humor, and a lot of the jokes that he makes in the book are just like really my humor too. Like a lot of them are punny and stuff, and they're just so good. And they're talking about Ruckley. That's what he's talking about. The person who got lobotomized. And they go in through your eye socket. They said they used to cut them open, but they go in through your eye socket, which I've actually heard.
Don't they go in through the corner?
And they just take which I've seen people talking about lobotomies and people who have actually been lobotomized and the things that they had to go through.
They go up under the eyelid.
They
with
go
the needle
in through
or
the
whatever.
eye, and then they take a hammer and they just go and hit that part of your brain. Yeah. And it just damages your brain to where you're more docile.
Yep. So that's terrible. But the older forms of lobotomization too are like to cut into the temples here and access that portion of the brain through the skull. But yeah, I don't know. So McMurphy has this great conversation too. We see how intuitive McMurphy is just right off the bat whenever he's able to just look at Chief and identify that he's a sane man playing like he's insane. Yeah. So that's one of the big things there.
He's intuitive about what's going on.
He's very in tune about everything. Yeah. He realizes very quickly just after that short therapy session in which the nurse asks them basically what they've done wrong and how to basically
she's trying to get like personal information on them
to hold over their heads.
Yeah, exactly. And so she's trying. They'll read their history to them, try to get them to admit to things.
And talk about it,
incentivize other people if they hear someone discuss some personal information. Yeah. They'll turn it in so that they can get, what's the reward? I don't remember, but they get a reward if they give up personal information about someone else.
It's crazy. Yeah. So like during the thing, they were like, you were talking about his wife, like what can we tackle the issue, or his wife's big bosoms. So he keeps talking about this man's wife's big bosoms and how he's like really upset. I think it's Harding's wife.
It's Harding. Harding always talks about how she has giant boobs.
Right. So Harding's problem, the reason that he's in there is because Harding had this extreme anxiety and anger. He was very not superstitious. What is it? He's very paranoid that his wife was going to cheat on him or something like that because she's so well endowed in the chest.
Yeah, and so they keep talking about it, and they're like in the issue of his wife's breast, and the nurse is like, well, how can we tackle this head on, or grab the issue at hand? And McMurphy. Sorry.
McMurray?
We don't want to get his name wrong. This is
the main
She
guy.
keeps calling him McMurray.
They keep calling him
he's
McMurray.
Like, my name is McMurphy. And she says it every time because she wants to get under his skin.
And he was like, ma'am, you don't want to know what my uncle did to people who said his name wrong. And she stopped right there. But he's a little defiant, which is really scary.
Because she hates defiance.
She wants them to comply. So he was like, how are we going to grab this issue head on, friends? And she asks him, and he was like, what do you mean grab it head on? And he was like, about his wife?
He makes a sexual innuendo.
All the guys know in there, and she was blinking for a second, and then she realized it, and like her face kind of got grim. Yeah. But it was so funny.
Oh my gosh, it's hilarious.
It was so funny.
Yeah.
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 It's really funny. McMurphy is just so witty. He's very quick on his feet and with his tongue. He's very very quick. And that's kind of what I love. I love characters like that are super witty. So McMurphy already grows on you because in the first like 20 or 30 pages, you just have this really cold world that's scary, and then it's very bleak and hopeless, and then McMurphy just comes in this very crude ray of sunshine and rejuvenates the story for us. After the therapy session, quote unquote, because it's really not.
That's
No. He gets brought into the ward, the doctor's. Is it the doctor's office? Is
yes.
It's the doctor's office?
Dr. Spidey.
And he undergoes, I guess, a very loose analysis. He just questions him as to why he's here and what happened, and reads some of his case file and reports some of the things. This is where we learned that McMurphy is a statutory rapist, and that he has committed several violence crimes. And this is what got him into prison in the first place, was the statutory rape, and that the violent crimes were committed years ago. So he's a perpetual gambler, and
it's Mr. Tabor who refuses his medicine.
Okay. Mr. Tabor.
So this is just talking about the condescending nature of the nurses. So they're like, well, if Mr. Tabor refuses his medicine like a child, he'll be treated as such, and he gets taken away. And they get upset, and they're like, well, this is what we get. We treat you guys so good, and hostility is all we get. So he was like upset. I just want to know, for the love of Jesus.
Isn't Mr. Tabor the one that he had died, and they were talking about him, and they were saying once they die, everyone from the outside just sees, oh, this poor person at the mental institution just died. They were a great guy. They had 2 kids, and everyone's like, oh, that's so nice.
Yeah.
While they were undergoing like such horrible circumstances in life.
So this is another part that reminds me so much of, which is so scary for me, because I've been reading a lot of Russian literature right now over the Gulag Archipelago that happened between 1920 to 1980 in the USSR while it was still standing. These gulags that were held, that were completely severed from other forms of government in the USSR, and just imprisoned tons and millions of people, and like tortured them during interrogations and all kinds of stuff. And none of the average Russian citizens knew anything about the happenings in the gulags. And their family members would disappear. They wouldn't know where they were. So it was an extreme case, but for the United States to have some kind of institution that almost mirrored those kind of things, where terrible things were going on in the background that nobody knew about.
We just heard about, they're getting help.
Right, school. It says in the book that there were tours that would go through, like of a school or something like that.
Yes.
And the teachers would come by, and it would be such a great facade put up that these people are being helped.
He has a name for that person. I can't remember, like the person who comes by for like
it's like the PR person. It's like the public relations individual that runs there.
So what people feel good about what they're doing for, they're helping these poor people and trying to feel good, when we see that these people are actually being abused. So like Mr. Tabor, they talk about how after he refuses his medicine, he's and this is Chief's watching all this, and he said they push him face down on the mattress. One sits on his head, and the other rips his pants open in the back and peels the cloth until Tabor's peach-colored rear is framed by a ragged lettuce green. He's smothering curses into the mattress, and the black boy is sitting on his head saying, "That's right, Mr. Tabor, that's right." And so they're sedating him and like holding him down and abusing him, and he's just not the same after that. So these people go in there with these small issues, or like these anxiety disorders, or maybe it's something major, but they get exacerbated by the abuse that's going on by the orderlies and the nurse. I like how he does time. So like Chief measures things in time based on like the sounds that he's hearing. So he's like, I hear the door open, it's 8:00. So he's measuring time like through that.
Do you think they have any like clocks or anything in there that are saying? I have
no idea, because Chief is measuring time through like different things that people are doing.
Well, like even in prison, that's how it is with like, so like for people watching, I worked in a prison. I wasn't in prison. But so like in prison, there's no clocks or anything on the walls or anything like that, so they would have to have a clock to know what time it is. But they know what time it is based on what the officers are doing. And so if someone comes on the pod that like is some random person they haven't seen before, they know kind of what time it is. They see certain other inmates come on the pod.
I think it's almost a little inhuman not to have clocks.
Yeah. They have to have a clock if they want to see the time, so they would have to ask us the time all the time.
Why can't they just have clocks inside the prison? Like, I feel like that's like a natural, like,
that's
human
right. That's a great
right
question, because I also wanted to know what time it was.
If I had to guess, it would probably be... I mean,
so
if I was a prison warden, right? If I was a prison warden, I wouldn't put clocks in there because that just increases the chance that they can organize some kind of escape.
But not even for us. They know exactly
when things. Well, you can wear a watch, can't you?
Yeah, but I mean, they could wear a watch if they wanted to.
They can buy watches from the commissary, can't they?
They're expensive, but yeah, they can.
Well, how much? Like $300?
I don't know. I didn't look at the
because the radios are like $150, aren't they?
They're expensive. They are.
Yeah, radios are. I did a lot of listening about because Brooke used to be a prison guard, and my buddy Ryan is also currently a prison guard. So when you guys got those jobs, I started listening to a bunch of former prisoners on podcasts and stuff like that, and their experiences in prison. At the federal level and stuff like that, and their commissary items are very expensive.
Yeah, and in a lot of prisons, you have to even buy blankets and pillows in commissary. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you just don't get one.
Yep.
That's wrong.
Yeah, you have to buy
it. Is.
It's American prison system. We'll get into that later. Right now, that's just that's where the majority of our
big conversation.
That's where our mentally ill population.
Well,
is
yeah,
now.
I worked in the psychiatric building at the prison that I worked in. And it was a lot of older people. What?
They're not real criminals. I mean, they
some of them had crimes. It's to get in a maximum security prison. It's not
mostly violent crimes.
Well,
right?
No, it's not about the crime. It's about their attitude, how they act, and their behavior. And so you had a lot of people in there for lesser marijuana charges, but they're in a maximum security prison. Sometimes it's because of the 3-strike law, but sometimes it's because of their behavior and stuff. So everyone in there at one point had bad behavior, and that's why they ended up there. But the mentally ill people, obviously, they can't help having the behavior that they do. Yeah. There was this one person that everyone loved having uses of force on him because he was a vegetable. He never did anything, and so he wouldn't answer anyone if you talked to him because he had all of his stuff taken away by officers before, so he would only talk to rank, and people loved just gassing him because he wouldn't do anything about it. Yeah. And it was horrifying that these mentally ill people, they loved having uses of force on them, and every night we would have 5 uses of force on these mentally ill people just because they could. They wouldn't do anything about it, so why not just exert some force on them? Yeah.
I think in America has much too high recidivism rates.
Exactly.
Their rehabilitation programs are basically non-existent. And in comparison to other Scandinavian countries and prisons, they are inferior entirely.
Well, they have a different kind of justice system where it's restorative justice, as opposed to the prison is the punishment. Right. And so how you're treated in prison is the punishment.
But it's also a difficult conversation too because the Scandinavian countries also have life sentences which are maximum of 21 years. 20
well,
to 21.
Here life sentences are 20. Are they 15 or 20?
Help.
I don't know, but
I think if you're driven to a point where you're murdering somebody, then you have something wrong with you mentally. Right?
Well,
so you should receive treatment for that?
It depends on what kind of murder it is.
And I forget which Scandinavian country it was, but maybe Norway. The dude drove a boxcar through, killed 72 individuals in one sweep in a populated road, just murdered them, and then also caused massive damage to 20 other people. And he received the country's life sentence, which was 21 years in prison, and he'll get out when he's 50. So,
well, a lot of times with life sentences, because even in the U.S., life sentences are 15 to 20 years. I think they're 20 years. But what they'll do to get someone to actually have life in prison is they'll stack them because you can run life sentences concurrently. So someone can be serving 3 life sentences at once. In certain states, they still do that, concurrent life sentences.
In Texas, so you get
They stack them in Texas, so you can actually be.
You can stack.
Really
you can serve
Texas
multiple
or just
life sentence or capital punishment. So
which is death.
It can be life in prison, just complete life in prison, or it can be.
Well, yeah, I met this one guy that I saw. He had committed capital murder, and I looked at what his prison sentence was, and it said 9,999 years. Yeah. And I was like,
so that's just
like
how
in
long
California, capital death punishment exists, but it would be impossible to get because the lawyers can continue to just reappeal.
There's so many
they just
people
continue
on death
appealing
row in California.
Appealing.
So many people on death row, like it's ridiculous. I don't know. I have a problem with capital punishment sometimes. Like, I think that it's inappropriate.
I don't think
but
it
like
should exist.
Every once in a while, like like that mob culture and that like savage in you, like wants to be like, all right. So like if people kill people on hate crimes, or like kill people because they're black or because they're gay or whatever, I think that you should be punished to the fullest extent of the law. Like if it just like the people who hunted down and killed Ahmaud Arbery. I'm like, okay, Georgia has the death penalty. I hope they exercise it.
See,
like,
sometimes
I
find
use it when it's actually appropriate.
Like, sometimes it's hard because I'm completely against it, but sometimes in my head, my first thought is I hope they do have the maximum punishment, but then I have to pull back because I know I'm against that, and I have to rethink about the reasoning behind it because I try to be non-biased about what the crime was, and I just have to think, what about if we compare it to a different crime? So it was murder, so if we look at a different murder and they don't get capital punishment, so I feel like everything should be on an equal plane
or equitable.
That's why I don't think that it's
for me,
reasonable.
Obviously, previously I had been a very staunch supporter of the death penalty and even believed that we should go forward in Texas with like an express lane with
just knock them out.
Right. Well, I think that we were
line them
like, well, I used to be, and I still am this way. If you're going to institute the death penalty,
squad.
I don't think that we need to worry about lethal injection. Electric chair was too expensive and inhumane, so like if
well,
we
the
wanted
lethal
to
injection is super expensive too.
So like if
economically, the death penalty is not sustainable.
Right, exactly. It's too expensive, so we need to find a better way to.
Well, that's why people sit on death row forever. But I think before death, like the death penalty can be gotten rid of, you need to make it better and then just get rid of it because it doesn't need to be there.
Yeah,
right. So but I now am much different on the matter. I don't think that we should expedite it. If we want to, we could, but that's on the way to get it out the door. After reading books from Fyodor Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment, and The House of the Dead by him, have both really opened my eyes to the possibilities of rehabilitation, even with murderers.
Yes. Even with the worst people.
I think anyone can be rehabilitated.
But it's so difficult to try and balance. Mobs are real, and they're really hard to deal with socially. So if we have an individual who goes and murders 73 people in the streets with a boxcar, we have hundreds of individuals now who are directly affected by that, and we have even more, thousands of individuals who will rally behind them that want that person's death.
We have.
So
we do have justice for that. So like Dylan Roof, I can't remember his last name. Dylan, he went and shot the black church up in Charlottesville, and he's on death
Charleston or Charlottesville. Because I was in Charleston where they shot up the
You're right.
Because I was there when it happened.
Really?
Yeah, I was going to be 3 buildings down right when it happened. We were going to go eat downtown in Charleston, and we decided not to. And while we were eating, we saw in the news that happened, and we were like, oh my God, we would have seen him run down the street.
It's crazy.
Yeah. So he did receive the death penalty, but it always goes back to our society and how we treat people with mental illness, how we treat men in our society, how we treat different things. It's just something really big that like we discuss, like emasculating men. They're more likely to become like because men do not express their emotions through they don't cry. So we're taught, like I was never told like dry it up, suck it up, you don't need to cry, be a man, grow up, grow some balls. I was never told that growing up. I was always allowed to express my emotions. So boys are much more likely to express their emotions through violence.
Because
so
they're
when
capable
they're angry,
of it.
they're capable of it,
I mean, that's the main reason.
They have the right hormonal environment for it, and
they have the increased 25% in upper body muscle mass.
Yeah, and so they're not taught how to express their emotions properly, and so they're more likely to become like very like, they can't communicate their emotions. They're literally we're left with these emotionally inept men who get angry about a certain race, they get angry about a certain like woman, they get like just different things, and they hyper focus all that anger that they've had in their life, or sadness or heartbreak or trauma, and they haven't been able to deal with that. And then we have such a high rate of violence among men because we have been teaching little boys from the time that they're born that they need to suck it up and grow some balls and get big, and you need to like this honor thing, this masculinity thing. So that's in part like why we have so many males like doing these offending
but also men, so, like, whenever they commit crimes, they're more likely to be
get heftier
way
sentences.
More violent crimes, and they get heftier sentences. But whenever like men murder people as like a crime of passion or anything like that, it's more likely to be violent. Whereas with women, usually they use poisons. They do it over longer periods of time. A lot of women serial killers were like nurses that never got caught because they would put air bubbles in people's IVs to cause them to have a seizure so they could save their life. And then they didn't really care if they died anyway. But a lot of it is for personal gain, for stuff like that. Whereas men, it's usually involved with anger towards certain people, or anger towards your sexuality, like stuff like that. Because like a lot of the serial killers or murderers that killed gay people were because they were mad about their own sexuality and sexual experiences, and so they took it out on people like that, like with men murdering women because they had women problems they couldn't.
As I've heard it said, is that the most dangerous man is a weak man. And so that's basically whenever you have individuals who are inept in different ways or character attributes, this is when you develop personalities that act out in aggression, that express physical abuse against their wives or children. And these are incredibly weak individuals internally, and so express physical abuse on the outside. And so and women just don't have the opportunity to do that because they're on average weaker than.
That's why they do it subtly with verbally, like
which is what we see in Nurse Ratched.
Exactly.
So she's on a huge power trip. Like, you know, she's got the upper hand in this situation, and so it's really reflective, like how we treat the least of these. So like these are the least of these in the society. These are the people that like we want to hide away. We want to cover these people.
Yeah, they're the people we want our country to look good, and so we're pushing away the people that make us look like a weak society.
Well, this is a really good segue into the two character dynamics that we have. The relationship between Nurse Ratched and McMurphy is, we see one, McMurphy is incredibly intuitive. He's in tune with what's happening. Within just within 5 minutes, he's able to identify exactly what Nurse Ratched's game is and how she's playing it.
And this could really prove that he maybe is a psychopath, because people who are like experience stuff like that, they're good at reading the room.
Well, they can
like they have to.
He's
read
incredibly
the room.
manipulative.
He's very
This is why he's such a good gambler.
But they can see other people's manipulation too, because they want to get ahead. Same with sociopaths. So psychopaths and sociopaths, they want to get ahead wherever they're at, and so they try to, you know, sniff out other people's games so that they can get a leg up on them.
This is why I think that McMurphy does have general, very mild psychopathic tendencies and behaviors, because he admits to traversing through different hierarchies, that and wherever he is, he gets as high as he can and he gets expelled because he's achieved his means of success through false or superficial means. So he gets there with his mouth and his manipulation, and then the actuality of having to like provide his service in whatever region that he falls through, because they realize that he's there artificially. He's not supposed to be in that high rank.
And we see him manipulating the doctor too. So like when he's talking about like, well, you raped a 15-year-old girl, and I don't know how old McMurphy is.
It was
but at the same time, like 15-year-old is not capable of like giving consent, and so we know this, and that's not appropriate.
He's like 30 right now.
So he's saying
Disgusting.
like he was like, well, doctor, she was plenty willing, and like kind of like nudging like, hey, you're my bro, like we're both men, we can talk about this.
Obviously he's a degenerate. I mean, he doesn't see any problem with what he's done.
But that's why I don't trust a lot of the things he says about like whenever he explains the reasoning behind things he does, because like psychopaths, they'll manipulate with anything to like get in with whatever you're thinking. So if they think you want this specific answer, they know you want that answer, and that's how they'll
and this is
approach
his game whenever he enters into this conversation with the doctor in his office, and they're discussing the various things inside of his case file, is that McMurphy is attempting to, he did convince his prisoners, his prison ward, that what is it called? It's the prison warden, right? He convinces prison warden and his officers over him that he's clinically insane and that he's experiencing psychopathic tendencies, which might be a little easy for him because he already has, he does have things going on.
They're saying,
right?
"Oh, you're a psychopath."
So for the most part, McMurphy is sane. He's not crazy. He might be narcissistic, I think, in personality, just because that's like his atmosphere, I think, that he lived in. I think this is his environment that allowed him to bring those attributes out in him, whether he's gambling or drinking or being, any way of a degenerate, to just put it roughly. And so he's convincing the doctor that this is indeed the place that he wants to be, because this is, the psych ward is the alternative to the work camp, which he is really tired of.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and he's saying, he's like, I am. He was like, I am. He was talking about, they were like, because the nurse was being skeptical, because she knows that he might just want to be in there for better like facilities than being where he was. And
they know this is the case. I mean, it's pretty blatant that he ended up here, because this is in the report that his prison warden said. He's just we believe that he's attempting to get out of the work so that he can go to the psych ward and relax.
And he kind of creates this diversion in the group. So like everybody's talking and bringing up stuff, and he triggers something in the group, and they start like all opening up in unison. And someone was like, I robbed a cash register in a service station. And
everyone
I killed
tries
my cat.
to one-up each other
with their sins and transgressions.
It was like, I killed my cat when I was 6. Oh, God, forgive me. I stoned her to death, and my neighbor, and I told my mom that my neighbor did it. And like,
and there's one guy that's like, I tried to take my sister to bed. And then he's like, I actually did take her to bed.
Yeah.
This other guy's like, I tried to take my brother to bed.
And they were like, so did I.
Is not an unusual experience for people with siblings.
And then we had
for those of you wondering.
Especially in with kids in foster care, the kids with
siblings,
conduct problems, is that they'll end up sexually abusing siblings, and it's a huge problem because then they don't get fostered, and
it's an extreme taboo, so it's something that's difficult to get out with the individuals who suffer this or commit these problems. So they start blurting those kind of things out, and immediately we see McMurphy's introduction into the group, into the system, and he starts dismantling it purposefully. He identifies that this is a structure that is built by Nurse Ratched, and that she is the head coordinator, she is the conductress of everything, and so he purposefully dismantles it, and he even has a conversation with Harding and the boys afterward that he says, if I can't by the end of 2 weeks have her
like broken down. He's basically wanting her to lose her facade.
Right. He takes $2 or $5 bets on this, and so he means to make true on his bet.
And it's a lot of crazy stuff is happening in between that. So like these people start getting triggered within the group. So like we have Big Pete, and he starts blowing up, like, because he starts saying, I'm tired. And that's all he says is how tired he is.
He's a chronic mute for the most part.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden he just loses it, and people are on him, like orderlies are trying to hold him down, and he didn't have a lot of time to finish what he said, but I think this is just so heavy. He was saying, like, you see, I can't help it. Don't you see? I was born dead, not you. You weren't born dead. And he's talking to the orderlies, like, just trying to say, like, you don't know what's going on inside my brain.
And Chief explains, whenever he details this piece of dialogue from Big Pete, that this is emblematic of the group's overall feeling and diagnosis of psychological problems.
Like, I've been dead 55 years. And, like, just how the gravity of that statement, just saying, like, you know, I've had something wrong with me for all these years, and he's trying to convince these orderlies to, like, get off of him. And there's, like, 4 of them, like, holding this man down until they can sedate him and give him the shot one more time. And this is just kind of where it leads into him and Harding having this incredibly intellectual discussion.
Yeah, so it's this conversation between Harding and McMurphy that I actually mistook Harding for a doctor. I thought for some reason that McMurphy was having this conversation with
first
a doctor.
I had to go back and see.
I had to go back or look at the end of the dialogue to realize that Harding is a patient. He's extremely intellectual. I think he is a doctor, isn't he? He's of doctorate education.
He has a doctorate.
He has a degree because he has it hanging next to a frame of his wife.
Right.
Like a picture of his wife
with her big old
boobs.
boobies.
And he's and he's a scrawny man.
He's a doctorate not of the MD variety, but of the PhD variety.
Yes.
So I don't know what specifically his PhD is in, but he's very articulate and extremely intellectual.
Yeah, he kind of reminds me of you. So like with the verbal sparring. So he's like, oh, you're saying all these metaphors. Well, that metaphor cancels out that metaphor, and he's very intellectual. So he's very good at arguing with people.
Which is odd. Like in the beginning of the book, you don't realize why Harding is there. Like when I realized that Harding was a patient, I was like, why is this man here? Obviously we have, because it was a surprise that Chief is a sane man. Why is he here? But then we see Harding and we're like, why is this man here? He's talking a lot. He's like the opposite of Chief.
I really just think it's because if anybody has any kind of aberrant behavior, they just committed them.
Well, we'll realize we'll be informed later in the book.
And
as
I want to know why Chief is there. I don't know why he's there yet.
We learn why Chief is here. We learn why Harding is here later in the book.
He has a flashback at one point.
Have you read the entire book?
I have not, but I watched the movie.
Okay.
Okay.
I watched the movie. It's so good. I'm really excited for us to talk about the movie because
I'm excited to watch it.
It's I mean, from what they had to condense it a lot because this book is tons of dialogue, and tons of dialogue, really well done, so that you just flip the pages and I burn through the pages. Personally. But in the movie they couldn't have that much dialogue because it would be very noticeable that these conversations are going on for a very long time. Realistically, that's how it would be in the real world. And books can achieve that kind of long dialogue form of discussion.
And he's just watching it, and I really like that he's just this passive observer. You know, we don't have Chief say one word in the entire
That's always cool whenever you have a book where the author, the narrator, is not even the main protagonist. It's the same with like The Great Gatsby and Nick is not the main character. Gatsby is.
Yeah, and it's the same thing with The Time Machine.
Yeah.
That we just read. So we have like these people that are sitting back and watching the story kind of unfold. And that's really good because they can actually be an active participant and it's viewed through their lens. So like Chief isn't this incredibly like intelligent person, but he's so perceptive.
Yeah, he seems very perceptive, very descriptive. He's capable with his words. And that's another point of confusion that you might have when reading the book is trying to assess whether or not Chief is more cognitively capable in his narration, but then like in reality he's not as good. Like is he only that way in his head, but then
I don't
like
think
I think from the amount of like treatment he's probably gone through over the years,
it says that he's gone through over 100 EST treatments.
I think he's still pretty foggy.
I think with like maybe if through verbal communication he might not be as articulate as he is in his head, because
he can't express himself.
It might have been destroyed with all of those treatments, and so he can think.
Reasonable to believe that despite I think all of Chief's thoughts and narration are being translated by the author from images into words. So I think that Chief thinks in images, because people usually do too. Sometimes they can work up the muscle to think better in images. Like for me, I think in words primarily, and then have to deliberately transition my word thoughts into images. Like if I'm working on a project or something, I think Chief thinks in pictures, which is why we get such beautiful descriptions and such tragic and horrific descriptions from him. And the author is translating those, obviously, because it's a book, those images into words, and then Chief is not capable of describing what he thinks very well with his mouth.
And if this book really was like written on psychedelics, like they intensify your thought process, like so like you are literally vividly thinking, like the way that this is written is a very stream of consciousness, people being a passive observer, and you are that way when you're like on psychedelics. So like I love how it's written, because it is like you can be deeply introspective at that point and think and understand like the nuances of human behavior, and start to break things down whenever if he's really writing this
I would
from
guess
that perspective, because he's hyper focusing on this one man's perspective, and so it's really evident in there. If that's true, it would make sense if he was on acid when he wrote this.
Yeah, and a lot of people who haven't had any psychedelic experiences, whether it be mild marijuana use or the more intense acid trips, it's hard for those people to envision anyone going through those experiences and then being able to write at the same time. But we've seen multiple authors. The father of psychedelic writing is definitely Hunter S. Thompson with his famous book, what is it? Something Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
Oh yeah.
And he's an avid journalist.
Yeah, it intensifies your
so many drugs.
creativity. So like it hyper focuses your creativity. So like a lot of people can draw better, write better, because it just really, that's what people talk about for productivity. A new trend is people microdosing on LSD when they go to work, and they just feel like hyper focused whenever they're doing things, and they can get a lot more done, because it wipes out all this human distraction. So like you have a lot of emotional distraction and like things like bogging you down, and then once you're on psychedelics and you take that and you're focusing on like one project. So if he's sitting there like, I'm gonna write this book while I'm on acid, it would be very easy for him to just burn through and do it. Because he's being able to hyper focus his like brain towards that. And it's a really cool thought to think about somebody being like tripping like that and being able to create something so good. Like this is a stunning book, like to read, like the imagery that is in it. So they talk about Harding being able to move. So like they're talking about this tension between Harding and McMurphy. And so Harding, like they're arguing about basically the nurse being a chicken and like seeing the drop of blood, and like everybody's doing pecking them apart whenever they're doing the group. A pecking party. That's what
McMurphy refers to the therapy session as, was nothing but a pecking party.
And he's like, no, buddy, she's not pecking at your eyes. That's not what she's pecking at. And you can see Harding flinch. And so he's saying like Harding flinches. I see his hands begin to creep out from between his knees like white spiders from between two moss-covered tree limbs, up the limbs toward the joining at the trunks. So like he's using this like extremely vivid imagery that like it resonates with us, because it's this mentally ill person like seeing like how creepy his hands look and just the different nuances.
Yeah, and like usually in a lot of the books that I read, one of my favorite authors, and I've said it before, is George R.R. Martin. And for the one reason that I love it is because his description, his dialogue, and his action are all very balanced. And he has a formula as to how he approaches scenes, and he takes almost the exact same steps in all of his scene explanations, unless it's, he needs to break from it. So it's always like description, action, dialogue, description, action, dialogue. And in this case, we see lots of different oblong scene descriptions here. So sometimes you'll get bogged down, like with Tolkien, tons of description in environment, and to the point where you almost and then he'll
I
describe
think with
battle.
Tolkien, though, it was a lot of his stories were based on the world building,
right?
And then
he lost
so he
sight of
builds the
action.
world, then puts the characters in it, and so every scene he's building the world around them, which makes it where you can completely see everything that's happening,
right.
But it also may drag on a little longer, even though I think Tolkien is a great writer.
Right.
I think definitely in The Hobbit you can see that more than in The Lord of the Rings, that he doesn't find a balance between like world building and characters' actions and dialogue.
Because it's a problem for me whenever the world building lasts like pages and pages, and then whenever it gets to like an intense battle that he's like prepared for you, it lasts like a page.
He's doing
and I'm like, what happened? We just had a huge war in a page and a half. Like, this is terrible. So I think that in this case, the description is so well done that even though it's heavy on descriptors, it doesn't feel that way taking it in.
It makes so much sense how he's doing character building, because this is a man who's sitting there watching these people come in. He knows all of their problems because they're having group. He doesn't have to engage with them, and he's just dissecting their character like bit by bit. So we can see Harding get like amped up. So like at first we're like, oh, he's this intellectual, he's quiet, he's the one in charge, like this isn't a big deal. And then we see him get upset, like, oh, our dear mother Ratched, a ball cutter, why, friend, that's most unlikely. And he was like, and we just see like the antagonism between both of them and like hyping him up. And then whenever he's getting Harding's getting really, really intense and just talking about like, oh, our dear mother who watches over us, and he's speaking rapidly, and that's increasing, and just the nuance of it. There's no dialogue that cuts him off. It's just gosh,
I think this is where we get to see Harding's flaw. This is why
this is his problem. Okay,
he has an intense problem with anger and
and we
the
have
things that he says are
too.
Paranoia, anger, and as he gets angry and more paranoid or offended by some small thing, he unravels.
He starts to unravel, and so it just ends by McMurphy just handing him a cigarette and lighting it, and so he's smoking and talking, and
that's kind of like what I love most about McMurphy as a character, is that despite his wretched personality or his dealings outside of the institutions, the things that got him into prison, aside from all of that, his dealings with these patients is expert. I mean, he knows just what to do to set them off and then mute them immediately. So he knows exactly
I think he knows exactly how to play people.
Right.
He is an expert in manipulation, and manipulation can be used
for good or bad.
Yeah, exactly. So you can manipulate someone into calming down, being like however you want them to be. If you want them to act up, you can make them act up. If you want them to really enjoy you and be your friend, you can do that too.
And if they're experiencing their psychotic like kinds of their manic behaviors, he can immediately just do some small thing, some small input that will calm them down immediately.
And he's already picked up. He was like, oh yeah, the little Dr. Spivey, he's a dope addict. And he's already picked up on it and like told them, and everybody's like, no. And he's like, no, he's addicted to Demerol. Yep. And so he's really just picking apart everything, and the capability that he has, I think, could really lead into destroying the infrastructure in the hospital, because if he could hype up all of the patients and like get them all like really amped, that could start breaking down.
And that's one of his main goals, just going into it. That's part of why he is a gambling man in nature. He knows this and says it almost explicitly, is that he wouldn't even have the capability of riling up Nurse Ratched unless, of course, he made a bet first. The bet is what drives him and gives him his power to do his full and best work as far as manipulation and antagonization. So
and McMurphy's like, you're not a crazy man. And then to Harding, and he starts like talking really fast. And he was like, hold on, you're talking like a crazy man? How astute. And he was like, I am in here. He was like, obviously I'm nuts. And he was like, you're not crazy that way. Like, you're really intellectual. But, like, he was like, you're not any crazier than any asshole on the street.
Yeah, and this is one of the overarching themes that I think that the book chooses to take with mental illness, is that these individuals have some kind of image of themselves, and they fall into this, I guess, self-fulfilling prophecy of mental illness, and that if they would take the time and the opportunity to think of themselves as McMurphy wants them to, as not crazy, but
or
just
not rabbits.
Yeah, they're not rabbits. They're not crazy. Mm-hmm. They're just as crazy as everybody else in the world. But they've bought into this idea that they are clinically insane, and because of that, their behaviors and insane tendencies are amplified. Mm-hmm. So we continue to see McMurphy trying to convince these people that they're not as crazy as they think, and that if they would just treat themselves like regular people, that they would be just as crazy as the average Joe. So, and I think he makes more arguments for that later in the book.
He's saying, and Harding is like, if you keep being hostile like this, if you keep doing this, you will get shocked. And he was like, you know what? I'm not going to get shocked. I'm going to break down Nurse Ratched. And that's kind of where our thing wraps up, is that he's making this bet and this plan with Harding, and that he's going to basically bust the system. And nobody has faith in him. And, like, partially, I don't either. Like, what is he going to do? Like, I mean, even if he breaks her down and stuff, like, we'll just get a new system of the violence and the drugging of these people.
Yeah, this is the end of, I guess, what you could call chapter 5, or...
Yeah, I mean, there are spaces. There's no chapters, but if you were to number them,
if you're reading in the paper book or on Kindle, I'm assuming that the pages should be the same. And this is page 72 is the end of that. So on the title here, we're going to say chapter 5, 1 through 5, because that's what we've seen some, like, Spark Notes and stuff like that label it as. Spark Notes, I think, classifies it as part 1 and then part 1 continued, but that might be farther into the book. I don't know. It's very confusing. I wish that Ken Kesey would have just put chapter headings or something like that on there.
Yeah.
But the ending for what we'll be discussing or have already discussed is that after a long talk with some of the acutes, McMurphy has this talk with the acutes and the chronics about the state of things. He decides to take Nurse Ratched head on. He makes a $5 bet with the fellow patients that he can, quote, get Nurse Ratched's goat within the week. And that's kind of where we stopped reading. And I think it was a great space, too, because it's just like call to action. And, you know, what next?
Yeah.
So now that he's decided that he's going to try and basically dismantle the asylum, because all of its strict orderliness, he wants to be the chaos in all of it. So, and he has pretty much a good confidence that he can. And of all people, he was able to convince them that he's insane. And honestly, I feel like the insane asylums don't even have a strict, like, code for it too. We'll find out more about the patients who are there.
They go there to be diagnosed a lot of times.
A lot of the times they'll just go there of their own accord and check themselves in. So,
but especially during the 60s, some people could be there just because, like, they're gay or something.
Oh yeah, there's some people in there because they are gay. And
so they don't have any mental disorders, but you could be in there for being addicted to having sex. Like, there's a number of things that, like,
you could be in there for just basic recidivism. So, like, people who just keep breaking the law.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know. That's basically what McMurphy's in there for.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's what he's in there for, yeah.
I forget which DSMs have homosexuality in it. And
it's
they also
like,
have...
I think...
transgenderism, which they just took that out.
In the DSM-6?
Yeah, they just
took... Or 5, I mean, sorry, 5.
3 has homosexuality, I think, is a mental
3 still has
disorder.
And then,
I think 4, they took it out. But also, in the DSM-5, that was the first time that they said being a sociopath and being a psychopath are different things.
Right. So, I mean, honestly, a lot of the definitions, we're not entirely sure. And as always, every form and field of medicine is going to be behind the curve at all times. There's always going to be things that we discover that we're like, oh, actually, this is wrong. And then, like, institute some barbaric form of treatment, whether it be, like, medical field or psychiatric field. So, yeah, I think we had a great conversation on this. And we kind of went off on a few rabbit holes. But I think that They're good conversations just because this book enters into several different realms, whether it be prison or psychiatric ward, and poses a lot of questions that I think that average citizens need to be having about the institutions that our taxpayer dollars go toward, and we need to be more educated on them, because we can't just have these institutions abusing their subordinates and their prisoners and us not know about it. So, and we just continue funding it. I personally think, and I think at some point, I'm not a huge fan of Trump, but at some point he said that he wanted to re-establish the psychiatric institutions, which I think, if done correctly, could be very beneficial for the people.
We do have a mental health crisis in the United States right now, like, just because we don't treat it properly. We just drug people and allow people to, or we don't drug people and we don't give them proper health care.
Right.
Like, health care is extremely expensive. That's part of the problem. We have a ton of people who are homeless that have mental health disorders, and there's not really programs for them.
There's a huge movement culturally for the homeless, but none of them seem to take into account the number of homeless people that are psychologically disturbed and like ill. So I don't know. I always feel like the people who are fighting for like against homelessness are just fighting a losing battle whenever they don't consider all of the possibilities. So like, most of these people are homeless because they are crazy.
Get jobs,
they need help. So you know, that's an issue that everyone ignores. Like, if we just gave them a home, then they would be good. I'm like, that's not true.
It's not just like building housing, but it's also going deep down into like the infrastructure of our society, and like really looking like how do we treat the smallest people in our world and in our society. So do we administer social programs for these people? Like, this is like, if I don't, people really complain about like having to pay taxes, but like, this is what I want to pay taxes for. This is like what I take a little bit of my money to go and help other people. Like, I don't mind that, especially for people who are mentally ill, which a lot of people are, like people who really need help. Please don't take my money to fund a federal prison, or take my money to, fund these institutions that are going to keep re-enslaving people, perpetuating the iniquity that we have in America,
it's my opinion that the welfare state has perpetuated slavery. So
actually, there's a really good documentary. It's called The 13th.
I was gonna watch it, but
really worth it. It really just talks about how after slavery ended, we just started arresting people of color and black people because it's another form of slavery. So we have modern day slavery right now in our prison
welfare
system.
state, in my opinion, is the biggest form of slavery. If you want people to become dependent upon the state and stay in a state of poverty, then you give handouts. And you lessen the effects.
Well, I think the government does perpetuate poverty. People in the U.S. like to keep impoverished people impoverished.
They want to keep people down. Like, they would like to keep people oppressed and dumb, just like why we see marketing towards different minorities for liquor and tobacco. Like, they want to keep them sick. They want to keep them just like we don't allocate. So okay, we can talk about Amarillo right now. So we have Hodgetown being built, and then you drive a couple of streets away, and they're like North Heights community. They need a school built, and that's something that we can vote upon.
Communities right next to there.
Yeah,
with, like,
right next to
broken down houses,
which
and
they're
everything.
not allotting funding. So we have Hamlet. So that is a school rated F. It's a school rating of F, where like nobody else in Amarillo.
Funding is not an issue, though. I think
we're not funding education. We're not funding helping
we don't need
the
to.
infrastructure
They need to be private
of the communities.
organizations.
We're not creating jobs in those communities. We're not creating like a functioning like ecosystem or like a healthy
I think
system.
It is strange.
The government
that,
doesn't
like,
need to create any of those. The people will do it. We need to privatize schools. We need to incentivize that these schools.
Oh no. We do not need to privatize education.
Oh yes.
No, because that allows rich people to get an upper hand. We cannot privatize education when an education is a right. It's actually a state right that we deserve a free and public education.
I don't know how you don't see that school district systems aren't racist classism.
Yeah, I do.
Deciding where people can and can't send their kids to school is racist.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
It keeps all of the black people in their ghettos.
We should never monetize and privatize education. That's dangerous.
How so?
Because people can choose the curriculum. They can like choose like what to teach their children and stuff like that. So like, okay, most minorities and people of like minority population.
System, where your child can go.
I don't agree with that, Maverick. That's a different
what motivation
topic.
do these nonprofit schools have for bettering their education?
Okay.
What motivation do they have? They lose nothing. The state continues to fund them. They continue to fail their students.
No, we do have incentivized, like, it just depends on where you are. So we do have incentivized, like, testing and different things like that. It depends on what
some schools are really bad according to the area.
And they continue...
according to the area. So, like,
and they continue to operate. We need to shut them down.
If you don't have proper funding, if you don't have money, so you get grant money for being a Title I school, and so you're able to buy better curriculum, you're able to buy better resources.
But
and
I
supplies.
think also, don't they the way they incentivize schools and give them more money is if the school is doing well, and so schools in impoverished areas are going to be doing worse,
which is why
and
passing
so they're
rates
going
are
to
increasing?
keep throwing money at like Canyon High School, which is
we don't
the
need
least diverse, awful.
Not true. Not
it
true.
does not have diversity.
It has Hispanic, but it
the
does
least
not have
successful schools in Amarillo are the ones with the most funding, which is why we didn't get Chromebooks until 3 years later.
That is true.
But they had iPads and Chromebooks before we ever did. So we dumped money into these.
But we also dumped money into athletics rather than putting money into having Chromebooks or anything like that. We're just putting money in our dumb football team that isn't even good.
Right, but what I'm saying is that if the schools have the ability to do with their programs what they see fit, we have the opportunity as parents to send our children wherever we please.
Yeah,
then we'll be able to incentivize the schools to do a good job, to produce well-to-do students that will go off and either enter into trades or colleges and do well. We do not do that right now with the schools. We perpetuate poor schooling, poor education in the poorest of areas.
Yeah,
and there's no incentive through nonprofit organizations propped up by the government to do better. There's just not. They continue to fail their students. And the thought that we as parents or individuals do not have the capability to know which school or institution to send our children to is ridiculous.
Yeah,
it's talked down to,
parents are really
and
not
it's
educated.
It's white people that want to keep the blacks and the minorities in their spot that they perpetuate the district school system. Now, if we want to break that, and I don't know how we don't see this as systemic racism.
It is.
It's ridiculous.
Schooling is definitely
so
systemic
a voucher
racism.
system or something like that will break the system. It will cause the schools that are not doing a good job to fall, and we can choose which schools that are successful, producing good students, to rise. So I don't know how if we put the responsibility in the parents' hands, things won't get better.
Yeah, I agree. It's because we continue to perpetuate a bad cycle. Like the kids are getting uneducated, and then they go and are in that community.
It's the single thing that produces the wrong side of the
however,
tracks.
I saw an entire video about
it bothers me. There's actually a bill that comes up like almost every term, and I get emails on this so I can vote towards like different things in education and stuff. So with my teacher organization that I'm actually a part of, which is a union.
Ooh, here we have a question from, first of all, Chris. What's up, my guy? Welcome in. And Don't Have Twitch says, so you guys don't have private schools? I guess this is the question.
We do have private schools.
We do.
We have like
now
a couple
people who are much more advantaged. Okay, so we have San Jacinto. And that's a Christian academy. Most of our private schools are religious based,
which I don't think should be the case. I think
but we have Ascension, and these kiddos get in through test scores. They can receive scholarships. They can.
I attended a charter school, which is like a hybrid.
My boyfriend went to a charter school. He went to
Vista Academy.
Yes, because
I also went to Vista
I know.
Academy.
He told me that.
Yeah.
And
him and
these
his
are something
sister
that
both
your
know
parents
who
can
you
pay
are.
for. Now, this is something that your parents can pay for. So I really want people to reflect on like our community. So like most parents, like if they're working, a lot of people who are in disadvantaged communities are coming from single parent households. They're being watched by their grandparents because their moms are working minimum wage jobs because they don't have a college education, because they're stuck in that cycle of like being in a district or like not being able to like get out of that community. These communities, and really like they are Title I schools, and they do get a pretty decent amount of funding, but these are kids coming in from drug addict families. They're coming in from violence and crime and stuff like that. And like I mentioned earlier, when kids are going through trauma, it's much harder to teach them. It's much harder for them to learn. At Hamlet, they don't even send home homework because the kids will not do it. They can't. I actually did tennis clinics out there. Like, I encourage anybody who has like a distorted like perception of like these communities that like to go and work with them, because they're really, really good kids. They have a lot of stuff going on.
A big problem, which is why I believe that the majority of
and the teachers
the majority
out there,
of minorities that do less or succeed less in America is due to their culture entirely, almost. Because this is the reason that we see migrants come over from other countries. We see West Indian blacks come over to America all the time and are very affluent. We see huge success in these migrants, and we don't see it in blacks that were born in America.
Yeah,
so
it's really interesting.
It's purely a cultural thing here. We have Asians that come over, we have West Indians come over, and they are some of the most affluent individuals in America, even more than whites who are born here. So,
well, they're really hard workers because
extremely hard workers.
They've learned to work hard and stuff. And I know a lot of the refugee population in Amarillo, because we have one of the highest refugee rates in Texas.
Yes,
and they are all extremely hard workers.
Even
they're all
the Dallas Mavericks is made almost entirely of Scandinavian individuals. Tons of migrants who have come over to play ball, right? Because this is part of what broke up some of the racism in America was like sports teams, because you cannot afford to lose games unless you're putting in the best individuals. And some of those best individuals are the migrants coming over here, working their ass off every single day, and are proud of where they are and what they can do. So that's why the Dallas Mavericks are made almost entirely of like Scandinavian people, because they work hard.
Well, even
they won't even hire Americans because they don't work. They're lazy.
Even that's why a lot of businesses will hire a lot of illegal immigrants also, because they work for nothing, but they also get jobs done so fast, and they work really hard, and they take advantage of them completely. And so they won't hire legal workers. They'll hire these workers they can pay like $2 an hour, because they'll just do it because they're illegal. And what choice do they have? And they'll work so hard, and then they'll get paid nothing. And they're just taking whatever jobs they can get.
Yeah, and we are very privileged. We're very lucky where we were born. We're very lucky to be born with the color of our skin. We're very lucky to be born in the location that we were born, even if it was a few miles away from Hamlet, or from, like, we're not that far away from Amarillo.
My grandparents lived in Hamlet.
So that area, like, we're really lucky that,
we're even lucky that we were born in America at all.
We're lucky where we were born. So if you're a child and you are even in a good school, but you're poor, like, I can't express to you how hard it is for kids to learn when their clothes stink and they have lice. I've had kids have come in with lice chronically. I've had kids come in and they're homeless and they're living at the Salvation Army. So it is hard for children who have impoverished situations to be able to get a leg up when they are born with a leg down. Like, they're already at a disadvantage. So this is something that I don't know if the government can help, but it would really help if we could improve education. And that really starts with paying teachers quality money. For the kind of effort and things that I have to spend.
I totally agree.
And things that I put in. And I'm very lucky. I actually got hired on at a really nice school. This is, I'm not going to have the same problems that I student taught in. So teacher burnout. So, like, if you look at Hamlet, like, those teachers are there not because they're getting paid. They're there because they love their jobs and they love their kids. and they're working their butts off, like, to try to overcome a surmounting mountain of problems that their kids already have.
George Bush single-handedly put a huge weight on all of the education system when he instituted the No Child Left Behind policies.
I think workers...
His standardized tests are pulling everyone down.
Yeah,
they're a joke.
There's nothing wrong with holding children back.
No,
some kids need to. Sometimes some kids need to stay an extra grade and repeat, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yes.
Yeah, we definitely, it's something that we're struggling with, especially in Texas. Texas is it's a great place to be a teacher, because you get paid better-ish than compared to the rest of the world, but it is also, we have just surmounting problems with our education system.
Well,
I feel like workers that are essential to run our society, I don't understand why they're paid so little for the work that they're doing, because teachers definitely should be making more money and schools should be invested in more, but they're not. They invest in athletic programs at schools that need like programs for their students, but instead they're investing in football because football is a core of our country.
Yeah, these are things that it's kind of part of like the issue with like the patriarchy that we have in our society and a bunch of stuff like that, because I feel, and this is just my theory and this is not necessarily true, but male professors are more like,
if you look at the football team, I think the moms are just as active in that.
No, what I'm talking about is why education.
Man, so I don't know how you can attribute it to
the
patriarchy.
Love football,
like why teachers aren't paid as much, because I feel like if teaching was a predominantly male profession, it was only men teaching. It was just because school teachers just used to be women. Single women, like teaching in a schoolhouse, single young women, and that's kind of how it started. But if teaching was predominantly a male instituted profession, it might make more
that
money.
Depends on what the career is, because like in prisons, like prison guards are paid nothing. Like that's the work that I was doing, I did not think it was worth it, that I was in danger all the time and I was getting paid nothing. And even police officers are paid barely anything. Also, they don't require any degree to be a police officer, which I think is absolutely ridiculous.
Which I disagree with.
No, it's less. I think it's like 3 months, but they don't require a bachelor's degree. I think anything where you're dealing with the safety of people
and the law, like you should know the law to the fullest extent.
They should require a bachelor's degree to be a police officer or to be a correctional officer. I was 19 when I started working at the prison. Why did they allow a 19-year-old to work at a maximum security prison?
Well, if you're 19, you're 1 year over being able to die for your country.
Well, I knew I knew an 18-year-old that worked at the other prison that took advantage of the inmates and the fact that there were no cameras, and he said, I can do whatever I want. That's why I want to work here.
I think training to be a police officer should at least be a little longer than a beautician.
It should probably be like a year.
2 years.
Yeah, it should be
an associate's.
Your job like dictates if people live or die. Don't you think you should have like a year of training at least? So, and a degree from a university? Why can you don't have to have any degree to carry a gun around and be able to shoot anyone?
In my opinion, a lot of the videos we see that come out with a lot of police brutality are mostly just individuals who are not trained well. If you see the incident with George Floyd, there were 4 or 5 officers that were involved. One that was committing like the murder, and then the other ones were holding him
down.
Yeah, and they were, and I think in that instance too, 2 of them had just been on the force. Like they were just like the freshest rookies. They were so green. They were like, you could count their active days on 2 hands.
Yeah.
Those are not individuals who are trained to take care of a situation like that. They need to have more training. And they had some of them were put on squads together. So there's so many problems.
But we train people that are like in the Green Berets really well, and they only see action like once a year. But people that are interacting with the population every single day, they're not requiring a high level of education. They're not requiring a high level of training to be able to make good decisions on whether, like with the guy that took the taser, they did not make good decisions with that man.
We need to have strict psychological background checks and analyzation done for these individuals that come to be cops, because just like with military, there are too many jarheads and meatheads that go into the military that just want to kill things.
That's how it is at the prison,
it's not even a hidden culture. It's like, I asked, like, even like Billy when he first went into the military, like, why do you go in there? And he's like, I want to blow shit up. I'm like,
they'll tell you to your face. People that want to be cops will say to your face that they want to be a cop because they want the power, the authority. People want to work at the prison because they can take advantage of these criminals that are pedophiles and murderers.
Yeah, I have people that I went to high school with that I found out they're state troopers now, and it makes my heart skip a beat because, like, I know that these are...
Tell me later.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about, too. I mean, and it's true, and he's told me stories about like stuff like whenever he was a disciplinary at the prison, just beating up on people, man.
Yeah, it's horrifying because, like, as someone that worked at the prison, I wanted to work at the prison to see the interactions between these officers and the inmates, because I want to do inmate rehabilitation. So I think it's important to see all levels of criminal justice, and that's why I wanted to be a police officer as well, because I think it's important to see how police officers interact with people while they're being arrested, while they're committing crimes. And I think it's important to have good relationships with the community as a police officer. And I feel like whenever I do become one, I'm going to see how deep it goes, because I think we're even now just seeing a surface level of how corrupt it can be or how bad it can be, and it can be so much deeper than that, because that's even how I found out at the prison. The warden is corrupt, the major is corrupt, everyone.
And that's the main institution I think that needs to be broken up, is the good old boy system inside of the police forces. So we should not have individuals. If we have bad cops going out doing bad things, breaking the law and mistreating their subjects, then we need to have good cops that are able to go in and tell the truth and testify against them.
Yes, but
we do not need people to lie for each
like
other.
a hive mind, where if one of them does something wrong, as a cop, your duty is to stand up for your fellow cop brother.
But it's hard when you're in that peer pressure system, I think.
Definitely.
But I feel like a lot of this would be weeded out with proper education. Like, you need to force these people to understand the full extent of the law, the gravity that they carry with their position, things that they need to understand. Like, they need to be well-educated individuals if they're going to impose authority on people. Like, they need to be intelligent. Which I'm not saying like that everybody isn't intelligent, but they need to be well educated, because
they just need to be wise.
This person on there said that they want to be a police officer because they've always dreamed of it, and they want to be able to help people, which is why I applied to the police academy, because I actually want to be able to help people. But injustices go so far.
I know, and it's kind of crazy. I actually heard from an accountant the other day that was like, if you do anything, like, he was like, I don't care who you are, like, get a law degree. And he has a law degree, and that's something that, like, I actually want to pursue, because, like, me being in education, the only thing that I can do to really change anything besides loving my students, like, with all, like, and really giving them the best of me and the best of my capability to teach things, is to educate myself constantly about, and being very informed about their rights as individuals, being very informed about...
Well, this is the call I believe that every citizen needs to answer, is being well educated on the laws that rule your land, and you need to be active in the legislation that will pass such laws. And if you have laws over your land that you do not agree with, then you need to take up pen and paper and go to the ballot box
and go change
you need
things.
To go vote. And that's just something that not a lot of people even want to do. Even everybody who's like up in arms with the BLM stuff, I don't care enough to go vote.
No,
they just post a bunch of stuff like
exactly.
The virtue signaling that's going on right now is ridiculous.
Yes.
People criticize me for not doing the black box and everything like that, But what about?
I don't think you were required to do it. I mean, it was a sign of solidarity, but you don't have to do it as long as you're taking action for things.
And also, I encourage people not to do something if they're not well educated on it. Yeah, people just do things for a trend instead of like actually being part of a movement. So like you can like say Black Lives Matter, but you're not doing anything if you're not working actively in your community, purchasing, like doing things that actually like further the Black community, working.
Well, I had people even critique me too. Like I posted, so I always post on Instagram a screenshot of the book cover of whatever book I happen to be reading, and sometimes it's the book club, whatever the fall book club is reading. So I posted a screenshot of this book, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, because that's what we're reading right now and discussing today, or I thought we were. And
we did mostly.
And people sent me messages criticizing me for like not posting about like some Black author. And I was like, he was like, what about a book written by a Black man? And I was like, do you want like a reference? Do you want me to tell you like some good books by Black people? Do you want me to read it like arbitrarily? Like, I'm sorry that I'm mostly just interested in classical literature, which is difficult to get your hands on Black authors. Yeah. And also I'm interested in psychoanalysis and psychology, which are just like Swedish people. I feel like there's a
problem with that too when you say like you're supporting someone only because of the color of their skin and not because you actually enjoy the thing. So you're reading a book and you hate it, but you're just reading it because the author is a person of color. I feel like you can support them in ways that you like in mediums that you enjoy or things you actually enjoy, so it's authentic.
And here's the
You're
problem.
not just being inauthentic saying I'm going to read this book because the person is a person of color. I'm going to shop from this site because the artist is Black. The person that created these clothes is Black.
And here's the problem too, is that we don't, like, even a lot of the people who are staunch on the left or whatever are super racist without even knowing it, because I posted a picture and you replied to me on this. I posted a picture saying that the BLM movement had moved me and that I am now listening and reading to more Black intellectuals, which is true. It technically did move me, and I would have never found an individual like Thomas Sowell if I had not experienced this cultural movement. Thomas Sowell is like a conservative icon. Yeah, and if anybody knew who he was, they would criticize me for it. And like, obviously I was being slightly facetious in that post, and no one knew because they don't know who Thomas Sowell is. But they don't care who Thomas Sowell is. They just care that he's Black. Yeah. So and that's the issue too. And if they knew who he was, then they would discredit me on that and say that he's not the right Black person to read or listen to.
Exactly. That's how it always is with people being if you support certain people, they're like, that's not enough. You have to support someone else. Like if you say you like Kanye West, and because of Kanye West's political views or anything like that, people will discount you on it.
He's not
and
the
say
right Black
he's not the right
to.
Black person.
I mean, a lot of stuff does go back to education. So we talk about so it was really difficult for me to teach about Thanksgiving when I know that is a false narrative. Like,
I don't like Thanksgiving.
Native Americans were not friends with white people. That's not how that happened. That's a story that is bastardized. I'm sorry.
Well, didn't they make the Pilgrims murder a rival tribe?
A bunch of stuff
to like teach them how to farm.
And we still today in Texas we still use the word Indian to describe Native Americans. We
say American Indian.
Yeah, you can say American Indian or Native American.
Just because, like, how are you going to differentiate between, like, West Indians and, like, Indian?
Well, just stop saying
general?
Indian. It's racist because it's racist. Just
they thought they landed in India, and that's why they're called American Indians, even though they're not. Did
they name themselves
Columbus?
Indigenous Americans?
It's just kind of something that.
Or did the white man name them?
Is Aborigines? Is that just for?
That's
Australia, or is that for anywhere?
As far as I know, the tribes always address themselves according to their tribe, and then the white man was like, you know what, we're not going to call you Indians anymore. I think we're going to call you Indigenous Americans. So just subserve to that. So any way around it, this whole like political correctness is always controlled by the white man, and I can't see it as anything other than racist labeling. So I don't.
It's a narrative. So like once you change the white narrative in the history, because we'll always read the history of the people that won. So let's refocus and let's talk about, like, there's a really good nonprofit called the Zen Education Project, where you can like buy curriculum or like different things to teach your kids at home, or like I can't do this. I'm a teacher in Texas. I have to teach the TEKS what I have, like my curriculum, but these really emphasize political activists that actually made a huge impact on our nation, like different people who actually changed the world that were people of color, or just different things, because we do a ton of, I'm teaching a white person's history to a room full of color, to a room full of kids that like don't understand that, and like don't so it's really great to boost like hey, you can do anything. Here's these people who have succeeded, who have enriched the Black community, who have like given you guys a leg up, and you educate them about
I think
that.
there definitely needs to be more education geared towards groups of color, because right now all of our history is told through white people's perspective, and so these other cultures, their history is not being written, or you have to take a certain class to learn about it.
Yeah. So I'm Native American, and so a lot of people like the narrative of blood quantum. That is a white narrative. That is something that was made up to separate and to destroy tribes. So Choctaw Nation, Cherokee Nation, we were sovereign nations, and basically saying like, oh, I'm a quarter Cherokee, I'm a quarter Seminole, whatever. They had to sign their blood quantum onto a thing called the Dawes List, because there was a governor named Dawes who basically saw the way that the tribes functioned as a community. They didn't use money. They didn't use anything. They worked really like harmoniously. And so he decided to do blood allotment to break them apart, so they would move away and get land, and like claim the land based on blood quantum, because you got more land based on how much more Indian you were. So
yeah,
this
but do
is
we
crazy.
not do the same thing right now in the small bureaucracies with the colleges? Because they award scholarships via blood.
Yeah, it happens. It happens nowadays.
But this is a leftist agenda that they push for affirmative action here. They
trying
want to account for the minorities via their blood count.
Yeah, it's wrong. Being Native American is it's not a race or necessarily an ethnicity. Before white people came and talked about it, it was about being part of a community. That's why we have Black Choctaw, we have Black Cherokee, because they were part of our community and it was part of the Choctaw Nation. So it was something that it was a community and a culture to be a part of, and actually was assigned a race early on by white people, because that's what they saw, that's what they could assign. And so it's been bastardized like over the time. So really crazy, like how we're not educated in that. We don't, like, nobody knows what the Tulsa Massacre is. No, we have a Trump rally that happened the week of the 100-year mark for the Tulsa Massacre, and then we have a Trump rally where he tried to choose to do it on Juneteenth, and they decided to move it.
He tried to do a Trump rally on Juneteenth.
That was a big deal. Like, people were like, no, and it was just in Tulsa, and so, and they're not. All the people have to sign waivers. Did they say it was
in opposition to Juneteenth or in support of it? Or did we just assume?
So I was listening to it, and everybody was like, why is he doing that? And Trump was like, I think it's great. We should do it on Juneteenth. And just kind of, and then all
did he understand the significance
of
it?
No. They were like, no, we can't do it on Juneteenth. We can't do it on Juneteenth. Like, they were like, Trump, they were like, Donald, like, we got to cut it, and we got to
Donnie boy.
They were like we're going to get backlash because, yeah, it just depends on, like, what you believe in. But, like, I mean, we have, like, an obtusely racist president, who does,
I haven't seen any
who's culturally unaware.
Him,
I would not, I think it would be highly inappropriate to put him, allow him to do a rally.
I mean, everybody says it. I don't like Trump, but I've never seen any racism from him.
I love the blacks. They love me. They love me.
I
love the blacks. They can do anything
racist?
for me.
I think just the things but I think he has a lot of implicit bias which can be racist. It's an underlying,
he's a capitalist.
shallow level.
I guarantee you he doesn't care what color your skin is.
Oh wait, hold on. Wasn't he talking about I'm sure those people in that were protesting, maybe it was Charlottesville.
Well, he also
were protesting, and the white supremacists with the tiki torches. He was like, "There's some good guys down there. There's some good guys down there.
Well,
don't worry."
He also
There's
called
no
Mexicans
good white supremacist.
Bad hombres, which is horrible.
MS-13 is made of bad hombres. Which is
Man,
what he was
to
referring
say that
to
was
with that
just-
quote, by the way.
It should have stopped when
He seems
mocked a
like the kind of
disabled
person-
reporter. It should have
Oh.
stopped. It should have.
But again,
so much
although
stuff.
as terrible as he is, because he is a terrible person, he's not a moral pillar of virtue, right? He is a businessman. He's a capitalist. He doesn't care what color of your skin is. He doesn't care who you like to have sex with or how you think of yourself as either man or female. When he got into office first in 2016 and the whole transgender movement was at its height, he said, come to Trump Tower, choose whichever bathroom you want.
Yeah, he
I
was
don't care.
actually, Trump Tower was one
Yeah.
of the first places
He
that
does
had
not
transgender
care. And people
bathrooms.
say he's racist and all kinds of other things. No, he's not. He's just a terrible person, right? He's just a bad guy.
I think
he's
he's
not
bad
racist.
with-
He's not sexist. He's out there to make $1.
I think
And
he's
the worst part is that
definitely
he's
he's definitely sexist.
He doesn't care
yeah,
what
he
sex
is.
you think you are, though. So he's not
But I
transist
think-
or whatever.
I
Okay.
think
he's not.
he doesn't do it intentionally, but I think
He's a violence insider. I seriously,
I think,
like,
but
he likes to stir the pot. He likes to get the
Definitely.
left riled up, and he really likes to get the
Yeah.
far right riled up because he's like, yes, fight so I can get
But
my
I
agenda
don't-
done.
Because
I don't
because
think
we
he's a
put him
Republican
off as
or
a
something else.
TV star. What would
That's
you expect?
Yeah, and
People are like, oh, he pulled that move with the Bible in front of the church. I'm like, yeah, he's a TV famous person.
But when,
like,
when conservatives are spreading the narrative that he is God's chosen person, that is toxic and that is evil. And I literally, like, it blows me away how much these Christians use the Bible to basically endorse Trump and to say that he's a good person.
So Astro comes in with a comment. He says California is currently working on reappealing Proposition 209, affirmative action, which disallows the state from discriminating on race, sex, gender, age, country
so they
of origin.
want them to be able to discriminate.
Oh, that's actually something that just came to the Supreme Court. So technically, in Amarillo, I could be fired for my sexual orientation.
Good.
So, like, if I was,
I thought they
dating a woman-
I think that's
changed that.
So here's an idea. This is the idea that Tom Sowell talks a lot in his market oppositions, right? Is that discrimination is going to be there 100%. And the areas that it will be in most is nonprofit organizations because they have no motive for profit. They do not make money like a private organization in a competitive sphere can make. So they are the prime organizations to discriminate against individuals, right? This is why private organizations trump nonprofit organizations. Just key and point right there. Secondarily, these discriminators are going to be few and far in between if we're talking about private organizations because they will lose out on money. They will have to pay for their discrimination because most likely these people they're discriminating against are oftentimes or occasionally will be the best option for hire. So say you're a basketball team and you don't want any blacks on your team, you're going to start losing games consistently. And if you lose games, you lose funding, you lose money. So eventually the capitalist narrative will take over and you will be forced to stop discriminating against individuals and start hiring them on. So the people who do discriminate will pay dearly for it, and the people who don't will have more business coming through their doors. So by allowing the people to have the freedom of choice to discriminate against the individuals that they service or hire allows the actual good people, the business owners and private organization heads, to hire inclusively.
So you think that
So how are
it
we
should
gonna
be allowed to get
Okay, so
rid
like
of
the
the
invisible
bad
hand.
companies?
If you no,
like
it's
choosing.
not invisible hand. It's allowing the good people to shine and us to identify who the racists are, right? How will we ever know who the racists really are unless we allow them to be racist?
I mean, honestly, that's a good thought.
You allow them to go behind the veil and to hide and to poison our systems from within. We have no idea who they are.
Well, that's what was happening before this movement with a lot of the people that came out as like the people that killed Ahmaud Arbery. Like, maybe that community would have never known that they were horrible racists until they murdered someone.
Right. You have to see them in action in order to take action against them.
Yeah.
So
you had to see the police having systematic racism to be able to speak out against them.
We're never going to get rid of discrimination.
No.
We're never going to get rid of these different prejudices that we have within races and classes of individuals. We just won't. It's like oxygen. There are evil people in the world. This is why we always say, like, oh, well, it's terrible that a woman can't walk through a park at night and not be raped. And it's like, well, yes, the same concept. I wish that, like, there weren't murders. Like, I wish that Buffalo Bill didn't kill people, skin them, and wear their skin around the house. Like,
yeah,
of course, that should never happen.
Yeah.
That should never happen. What are we to do to stop the criminals from committing heinous acts?
If I honestly sometimes, like, you want to look at the law and say, like, well, if it's against the law, like, then that's deemed as an aberrant behavior, and so you don't break the law, and you don't break the law. So, like, you can't fire people for being gay. But, like, Texas, like, it's a it's
a right to work state.
Yeah, so they don't have to give you a reason to fire you. They will find anything else.
Yeah.
Like, so I would never come out. So if I was married to a woman, or like if I ever decided that, I couldn't be like other teachers and be like, this is my family. I would never share that with my students because they'd go home and tell their parents, and I could potentially be fired for that. And that's inappropriate and that's not right. But what am I supposed to do? Besides, I would have to spend a ton of money and fight and go to the court system when there could already be like protections in place for me as a worker. Just like you can't fire somebody for being old. Like, there's protections against that. You can't fire somebody for being handicapped and just stuff like that. So if it's already a protection that's in place for...
Right. And the idea behind all that is that the freedom to choose will allow organizations and regions to form with like-mindedness. So if you are an individual who have values and concepts of ideas that are not supported in your region, then your best option is to migrate where you are supported.
Just like in Austin, I would... I'm really actually fortunate to teach for CISD because I can have tattoos and colored hair, a bunch of different self-expression things. So I would love that. But I would also love to be able to express myself in all forms
we saw
that I possibly could.
Tons of racism, prejudice, and discrimination with the Jews and the Irish that came over. They were discriminated against vigorously, but that did not stop the Jews from rising in economy. I mean, they're one of the leading affluent minority groups in America right now. And it was not because any affirmative action allowed them to be hired, forced people to hire them. It was because it didn't stop them from hiring each other. And they established economic prowess among themselves. And look where they are now.
Yeah.
The Jewish community was definitely a very self-sustaining culture of people, because if they didn't get hired by other businesses, they would just make their own business and hire each other.
And it's the same with the Irish.
And then just grow. Yeah. There are a lot of cultures that are very self-sustaining because they have to be.
Yeah. And just to, we'll end on this note, I guess, because we should wrap it up, because we're almost at 3 hours. Is that I've never seen a group of people, a minority group, I've never seen any group of people in the world benefit or come out of poverty according to any government regulation, any government policy, or any government handout. I've never seen it. I've never seen any minority. You can flip through the pages of history and see these migrants who come over, and what they do is they achieve their prowess and their affluence and their increase in IQ over decades via saving, building skills, and working hard. And you can flip through the pages of history and see that that's the case, and that the individuals who benefit from government handouts and welfare are kept as slaves by the system. So, yeah. we're definitely gonna have to do a more detailed title on this one.
I know
because,
this is
we talked about a lot of things.
This is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and The Broken American Dream.
Yeah, I think I might even, since we're almost to 3 hours, I might just go in and cut it up a little bit and then like make the One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest a separate video.
Okay, probably a good idea.
So Astro, thanks for coming in.
Yeah.
Don't have Twitch. Yeah. Thanks, Chris, for stopping by. And thank you guys so much for stopping by and for watching. This has been the Fall Book Club.
This has been fun.
And another reminder, all of the timestamps will be found in the description below. I said that at the beginning of the video for once. And
congratulations.
Deuces, Astro. And then next week we will be discussing, I guess, the next 5 chapters. I don't know, whatever we see fit. We might just, we'll burn through another quarter of the book. I think we're a quarter way in, right?
Yeah.
About a quarter. So, or a fourth. I think a fourth.
Maverick and I have ADD.
Yeah, I know. It's really bad.
It's a bad rabbit hole. Like, you don't want to watch.
This is what happens whenever we don't have Ren, because he usually keeps us on.
Yeah.
So thank you guys so much.
Letting you guys go off.
All right.
And we'll see you later. Everybody wave bye till it turns off.
Bye. Adios.
Bye.